Hi, everyone. I can't see anything or anybody. This is Lydia. Love to get started, but
Hey, Lydia. I'm here, but it won't let me start my video. It says the host won't let me. The host stopped it.
Same.
So it says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. But I'm here, so I don't know what to,
okay. Let me see. I can't see anybody, so
I can't see anybody either. I can't see anybody, and I can't put my video on.
I also see that Councilor Bach and Councilor Braden are in the waiting room, if anybody can get to them.
Oh, hey, Ricardo. I recognize your voice, but I can't see the waiting room. Let me see.
It's on attendee.
Oh, now I see it. I did the participant.
There we go.
Oh, hello.
There we go.
Hey, all righty.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, everybody.
this is Councilor Edwards. I'm just trying to get things organized, but I'll be on shortly and we'll get started as soon as I can see all the panelists and whatnot.
Thank you.
I think everyone had moved. Wi-Fi spots are also nuts.
Is Michelle here?
Okay. Can you see me? I can see me.
I can see you now.
Okay, good.
But yeah, there you go. Only like your lips. You gotta adjust your screen so that we can see your face. There you go.
All right. So we have folks on, and Michelle is the other. See you, Councilor Flynn.
Hey, Lydia.
Hey, Madam Chair.
Hey, see you, Councilor Braden.
Hi, Madam Chair.
Hey.
It's good to see you, Lydia.
Councilor, who else do we have? Michelle. I see Michelle's on. And Councilor Bach.
Mackenzie.
We have three co-sponsors, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Braden, and Councilor Bach. 6 of us so far. Okay. All right, it's 3:05. I'm assuming with if the co-sponsors are okay, we'll go ahead. I know there's a lot of public testimony.
Yeah.
And okay. As I understood, there will be nobody from the administration talking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just making sure we have Braden Bach.
That's happening.
Sorry, Flynn. Braden. Bach. All right, here we go. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It is Tuesday, November 10th, 2020. We are here today for a virtual hearing on Docket 0684, Ordinance on Surveillance, Oversight, and Information Sharing. This matter was sponsored by Councilors Ricardo Arroyo, Kim Janey, and Michelle Wu, and was referred to the committee on May 6, 2020. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12th executive order, we're modifying the open meeting laws to allow for us to continue our business, but also balance the needs of the public. Therefore, we're having this hearing virtually via Zoom. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities. The public may watch this meeting via live stream at www.boston.gov, excuse me, /city-council-tv. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date on Xfinity 8, RCN82, FiOS 964. For public testimony, written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made a part of the record and available to all councilors. Docket 0684 would lay out accountability, transparency, and oversight measures regarding the collection and use of surveillance technology and surveillance data by the City of Boston and information sharing by the Boston Public Schools. The ordinance requires submission for approval by the City Council of a surveillance use policy. for each department that possesses or uses surveillance technology, submission of a surveillance technology impact report, and if required, a technology-specific surveillance use policy. Prior to acquiring or using any new surveillance technology or surveillance data, and submission of an annual surveillance report for each department for which approval of surveillance technology or surveillance data has been obtained. The ordinance would also create a system limiting information sharing between BPS and BPD, limiting the permitted reasons for creating a student, report and the allowable information to be included in a report, requiring reports to be shared with the head of the school and the family of the student named in the report, and requiring prior to the sharing of the report with an entity outside of BPS, a meeting between BPS and the student with an opportunity for legal representative to be present, and confirmation that the student report was written pursuant to the criteria outlined by the ordinance. Creating a community information sharing oversight board to provide oversight over this section and review monthly reports from the superintendent regarding student reports, and requiring training for Boston School Police on the requirements of the ordinance. I will now turn it over to the lead sponsor. Well, I will turn it over to lead sponsors for some brief opening remarks. I will introduce my colleagues in the order of their arrival, and then we'll go to our first panelist. So in order of arrival, we've been joined by the lead sponsors, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Janey, and Councilor Wu. Also, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Braden, Councilor Bach. Have I missed any city councilors? Oh, Councilor O'Malley has also joined us. And I think I have everyone at this point. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues, starting off with the lead sponsors for some brief opening remarks. Councilor Janey.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And let me start by thanking my colleagues, Councilor Arroyo and Councilor Wu, for their leadership and their partnership on this ordinance regarding surveillance oversight and information sharing. I want to give a huge shout out to the ACLU, Massachusetts, to Unafraid Educators, the Student Immigrant Movement, and so many others for their work that they have been doing over the last year. And probably longer, but certainly the last year with my office. All of our offices have been working together for quite some time, and I'm glad that this is finally moving forward. This particular legislation, I think of it as a companion piece to the surveillance oversight and information sharing legislation that the council passed earlier this year, the facial recognition ban that we passed earlier this year. It's no secret that those technologies, facial recognition software, that they have a lot of discrepancies, a lot of, misidentifying people, and that this impacts communities of color disproportionately, particularly the darker you are, the darker your skin tone is. And so I'm really pleased that we passed that legislation, very, game changing, very important that we pass that. It's important that we take the next step, to go the extra mile and make sure that the reporting between our school communities and our public safety agencies are not overstepping, particularly when we see how Black and Brown communities, particularly males, have been targeted and criminalized throughout the decades in our city or centuries. For me, this is part of how we dismantle the school to prison pipeline. It is how we make sure that we are creating and reimagining public safety in our city. It's how we ensure that our schools truly are safe havens for our young people. As a longtime education activist and advocate, it really bothers me and disheartens me to see how using advancements in technology that should help us as a society, but how that has been turned against our young people, our own students in Boston Public Schools, particularly for immigrant children who are worried about their place in our community and society. And if they're undocumented immigrant children, the fears are even greater. While many talk about that these incidents reports are minor, for our young people in our schools, they end up having life-changing effects. We already know the history. I won't kind of go into what has already happened in terms of reports and our gang database and the BRIC and all of this, but all the more reason why we've got to take the extra step and make sure that we're dealing with the oversight and reporting so that we never see a repeat of the incident that we saw happen in East Boston. So I'm going to keep my comments brief here. I will add that I am very disappointed that the administration isn't here because this is an ordinance, and at this point we really need to understand their thoughts on this ordinance. We want to pass something that we can all feel good about. I am grateful again to the many activists and advocates who have been in this space doing this work, and I am grateful for those who are with us today on the panel and for the many folks who are signed up to testify. So thank you again to my colleagues, Councilor Wu, Councilor Arroyo, to all of the advocates, the panel, and to you, Madam Chair, for having this important discussion. Thank you.
We've also been joined, as I mentioned, by Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Sabi George, Councilor Campbell, and Councilor Mejia. Councilor Arroyo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to President Janey and Councilor Wu for their efforts to advance protections for the civil rights of our citizenry. And I'd also like to thank the ACLU, Unafraid Educators, the Student Immigration Movement for their work in moving this forward. Just to summarize, because I know we have a lot of public comment, just to summarize what this ordinance does. It requires the mayor to submit to the Boston City Council for review policy for each department that uses surveillance technology. That report or review would tell us the purpose of that surveillance, the authorized users and uses, and who can access that data. A creation of an annual surveillance report by the mayor that would tell us how the tech has been used, data sharing, amongst other things, and would report to the City Council to determine uses of the technology. And it details the information that school district officials can share with law enforcement. This would restrict it to cases of serious violence and credible safety threats. It prohibits sharing of immigration status, ethnicity, neighborhoods of residence, languages spoken, and any suspected or alleged gang affiliation that would be in student reports, and formation of a community board to oversee school districts' information sharing policy. I also just want to speak to the elephant in the room, which is the absence of the administration for this conversation. I've spoken to both parties. I spoke to BPD about this hearing, and it was my understanding that they could not appear due to the election that took place on November 3rd and how they would be working or operating around that. And so they're not here today. And I believe BPS, I received a call this month, actually, timely and on subject of about the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights had been asking for information regarding direct communications with ICE and Boston School Police. And that report did not, that information that had been disclosed after court order, that information included information that stated that as of this year, there was a communication between the Boston School Police directly to ICE in January of this year. And so, you know, these are tough conversations, and I recognize them as so when we have to talk about ways in which we have perhaps not had safeguards or protections that we should have, and now we are trying to create them. I understand that that can be a difficult conversation, but not being present for difficult conversations does not mean that we will not have them. And that's all I have for now. I'd like to get to the panel as quickly as possible, so I see the rest of whatever time I have here for opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Wu?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much to my co-sponsors on this for all of their incredible work and in partnership with a coalition of amazing advocates and leaders and for their very eloquent remarks today that already summarized most of all of the details that needed to be said. I will just add, this is the companion ordinance to the piece that the council had passed earlier, as the council president noted. This particular piece, though, has now been several years in the making. First at a hearing filed in early 2017 at which we had finally a full hearing with BPD in June of 2018. The basic premise is that we are misusing public resources and exacerbating distrust when the community has to mobilize each and every instance some issue pops up related to over surveillance, related to information sharing that harms our students and our residents. Whether it was the case of drones that were later discovered to have been purchased by the Boston police, whether it was our case of the East Boston High School student experiencing deportation because of information sharing by Boston School Police, whether it was a technology contract between BPD and a company that was about to apply a patch in the next version of the upgrade that would include face surveillance technology that is racist and a threat to civil rights. So rather than have us continue to come again and again and again, especially after the fact, when so much harm has been done just to protect anyone else who might fall into this category, it is time that we put down the actual framework, the rules, and a set of guardrails that will ensure trust in the only way possible by preventatively putting down some rules. So you heard everything that this ordinance does. I think it's really important just to emphasize that this is about creating the requirements for transparency and for public participation, to know that any time in the future that technology might be required or actions related to surveillance started, that the community will have had to approve, will have been part of a process that the city council would approve to put in place guidelines for that usage. We, in June of 2018, when we had this hearing and when then Chief of Police Gross was present, he did say then that he supported the idea that the administration was fully on board with the need for public participation and for public feedback, and that he looked forward to ongoing conversations about this and ongoing progress towards putting this in place. And so I just want to echo my colleagues' frustrations and disappointment that the administration is choosing to be absent today. The reason given to me directly was that they wanted time to understand more of what the language was, just to listen, that they're watching the live stream, and that they will come back, into the process later on when they better understand what is being proposed. As that's why I wanted to emphasize, this is now multiple years in the making. We had a hearing in June 2018 where there was a commitment to get this done. This was proposed in May of 2020. We have already acted on the first half of it with the face surveillance ban. So we will get the rest of it done regardless. I especially want to thank Madam Chair, who I believe was the counselor who posed the question at that hearing several years ago, just to understand the Boston Police Department's commitment to moving forward. So thank you to everyone. It's been an honor to be part of this process of drafting and moving forward on this issue.
Counselor Flynn. Thank you, Counselor Wu.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Thank you to the sponsors. Thank you to the panelists that are here with us this afternoon, and looking forward to learning more about this issue. Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you, Counselor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you also to the makers of this important ordinance. I really look forward to hearing what the panelists have to say and to learn more about this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Bach. Counselor Bach, he's not here?
You can. Yeah, I'm here. Oh, sorry, I was muted. You would think after a year of this. Not quite home yet, but I just wanted to thank the makers and thank you, Madam Chair. This is a really important hearing, and I think just such an important issue. It is, as Councillor Wu said, connected in fundamental spirit to the facial surveillance ban that we already passed. And I remain particularly committed to the sort of principle that we should be making intentional decisions about how we use surveillance in light of the kind of democratic community that we live in together, and should not allow sort of the evolution of new technology to be the tail that wags the dog. where we sort of start to live together in a different way, and in a way that's more invasive of people's privacy and erodes trust, just because we can, and just because, you know, technologies are suddenly available to us, and so we start using them. And so I think, you know, obviously this is not, what's being proposed is not a ban on surveillance technology. It is a requirement that national democratic look every time we take a step in that direction. And I think that's an appropriate thing for the council to do. And so I'm excited about this conversation and grateful to the ACLU and all the advocates for being part of bringing it forward. So thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Counselor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, I too want to add my voice to the chorus, thanking the makers for their important work on this very important issue. Looking forward to hearing from so many stakeholders, advocates, and most importantly, BPS youth, BPS students rather, to figure how we can be supportive going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Counselor Savi George might still be unable to speak right now, so I'm just putting it out that she is here, but she texted me that she might not be able to respond right directly. So we'll go to Counselor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the sponsors of the ordinance. Of course, thank you to the advocates and those in the community who have been pressing us to move on this for some time. Appreciate your continued advocacy as well. And I'll just say for the record, you know, I've been supportive of this since I co-sponsored the initial conversation on this issue with Councilor Wu and Councilor McCarthy. And it is frustrating that it's taken this long to sort of move the issue forward. Obviously, we have a new council, which is a good thing, which makes it easier. But it's also a little bit disappointing that, not a little bit, it's disappointing that the administration isn't here to weigh in and to offer some feedback or constructive feedback as to what changes they'd like to see or what their position is with respect to the ordinance. So looking forward to the conversations from the advocates and some kind of commitment or response from the administration. So thank you, Madam Chair, for your leadership, and welcome back.
Thank you. Counselor Mejia.
Yes, Counselor. Chairwoman Edwards, it's so good to be back in your presence. So glad that you are here facilitating and assuming your rightful place all over again. So thank you to the makers. I'm really excited to be here. I hear the frustration. I feel like we keep having the same conversation year after year, but this is the year to be a freshman counselor and seeing all of this traction when all things that deal with equity and issues that have been impacting our people for far too long. You know, the first hearing that our office filed was on safe sanctuary spaces, particularly as it relates to information sharing between BPS and BRIC. I'm thrilled to see that there's been a lot of action taken on this issue and look forward to working through the ordinance with the sponsors and the advocates. This issue for me is personal and professional. Too many students in our schools are at risk of losing their rights because of improper information sharing and surveillance. And one of the questions that I always ask, you know, with all of this surveillance, you know, we can't even solve, you know, we're still having a hard time solving homicides, right? So we have all of these surveillance toys, but it seems like when it's time to utilize them in ways that are going to help, I don't see that same sense of urgency. And I think that information sharing, if we're not sharing information that's going to keep our people alive, then we need to dive deep and figure out whether or not we're utilizing our tax dollars in ways that are appropriate. So happy to be here and always here for all of it. For those who know, we're going to come and we're going to dismantle systems of oppression, and it begins with this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other counselors before I speak? Okay. Just very briefly, I'm very excited about this conversation. It's true, it's been one in the making for some time. I will say this, I think it is incumbent upon government, if it is going to watch people, that it report on what it's seen and how it watched and why it watched those individuals. That's how democracy works, and it lives in the light. And so as a result, we need to know how we are being seen as citizens of Boston, and we need to know why our tax dollars are need to needed to survey each other. I think it's very important, especially if we make the argument, and some people have, that it's important to keep Boston police in schools, that we must then be hyper vigilant about talking about how we survey children. And we should be continually discussing that and being open about it and being held accountable when we go too far. One of the questions I had is specifically was about the constitutional rights, the access to counsel, and the ability to defend oneself when they're asked by a person who happens to be a police officer, but also in the school. Where did you go? What did you do? Can I see your backpack? All of which, if they were an adult on the street, could result in different constitutional protections and telling the person, no, you can't see it, you don't have a warrant. I don't expect children to do this, but I expect us as a government to be held accountable to how we treat our children, how we watch them for their own safety. That is what this hearing is about to me, is balancing those interests. You cannot say we need police there and then also say we don't need accountability and transparency about what the police are doing. We need to pick a side as a city. So I'm excited about this conversation. I think it's long overdue. And I think it's a balancing of true interests of safety, of privacy, and democracy. And that's how we need to see this. It's very serious that we understand how we are watching each other. And any government or enforcement agency or police agency that doesn't want to rise to the sunlight and demonstrate that is an entity that people are less likely to trust and work with. If in anything, I think they want to show how effective they can be, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and why they need to spend the money. And this is setting up that conversation so it happens on a regular basis. It becomes part of the culture. It becomes how we operate. This is not an us versus them. This is an us to a better democracy conversation. That being said, I am going to list some of the panelists who will go ahead and do their comments, and then we can ask questions as, excuse me, as counselors. I'm sorry, I have something in my throat. As counselors to the panelists. And what I would really appreciate also is for those who are testifying and for those who are going to have comments, if there's specific language concerns as well, or thoughts or anything that you would like to really kind of hone in on, that's very helpful for our conversation as well. So we have, and again, I'm apologizing in advance if I mispronounce anyone's name. Feel free to hold your finger up. I'll stop and you can correct me with no problem. No ego in this, but let me try first. We have Emiliano Falcon Morano from the ACLU of Massachusetts, Nora Paul Schultz, Unafraid Educators, Valerio Dovali, Student Immigrant Movement, Kimani James, member of the Boston Student Advisory Council. Am I good on the name? Very well. If it's okay, we'll go ahead and go in that order of testimony. Then the counselors will come with questions. Okay. And then we can open up for public testimony and all of us can be part of the same conversation. All right. Very well. Emiliano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. And thank you to the sponsors, Councilors Janie, Wu, and Arroyo for pushing this important ordinance forward. On behalf of the ACLU and our more than 10,000 members and supporters in the city of Boston, I am submitting today this testimony and these comments in strong support of the Ordinance on Surveillance Oversight and Information Sharing. Today, I will speak about two issues. First, the reasons why the city of Boston needs to give the city council the power to approve and regulate surveillance. Second, I will provide some comments about the general structure of the ordinance before this committee. As to the first issue, instituting a local law that provides for surveillance accountability and limits information sharing in Boston public schools is now more important than ever. A fundamental characteristic of a free, open, and democratic society is an appropriate balance of power between the people and the government. In free societies, people should know almost everything about what their government is doing. In contrast, the government should only collect and share sensitive information about people when absolutely necessary. But what was once a relatively straightforward, balanced relationship has become complex and asymmetrical. Rapid technological advancement and the government's use of technologies for surveillance purposes have shifted the balance of power between the people and the government to the detriment of racial justice, individual liberty, collective freedoms, personal privacy, and democracy. The city of Boston must institutionalize a public process to approve, govern surveillance, and to ensure a free future for all. The decision about whether the Boston Police Department or any other local agency should use surveillance technologies, and if so, how and under what circumstances, should not be made in secret without any public deliberation or debate. These decisions must be hashed out in public and driven by elected officials, by you, by the City Council, informed by their constituents and expert testimony. By so doing, we will avoid situations like the one we encountered in 2017, when the Boston Police Department bought 3 drones and tested them in a black neighborhood, but didn't tell anyone. A few years earlier, in 2015, a local reporter exposed that the BPD planned to buy a 1.4 million social media surveillance system. That was news to the people of Boston and to the City Council back then. After the plans were exposed and the people on the council voiced their concerns, the BPD backed off the plan. Likewise, in 2018, the ACLU revealed that the Boston Police Department had been using proprietary social media surveillance technology for years in secret. Agents used the technology to monitor people posting about Muslim religious practices and participating in Black Lives Matter discourse and protests. All of these activities protected under the First Amendment. And the Boston Police Department isn't the only city entity using advanced technologies that collect sensitive information about Boston residents and visitors, absent any oversight or accountability. In 2015, a security researcher discovered the Boston Transportation Department's entire license plate reader database was online in plain text, available to anyone with a simple internet connection. In all these cases, the City Council and the public were not consulted about any of these programs, leading to mismanagement, waste, and civil rights harms. In a similar vein, as the other members of the panel will explain today, the city needs to protect our students from surveillance and data sharing that imperils their personal safety and their educations. Given recent debates pertaining to the role of police in schools, we believe sections of this ordinance that deal with information sharing in Boston public schools should be improved. To that end, we are attaching as an exhibit, a new version as an exhibit to our written testimony, a new version of the ordinance, and a summary of the changes we would like to see. As to the second issue I will speak today is about the ordinance and the general structure of the ordinance. This ordinance has six chapters and 9 sections. The first chapter lays out the purpose of the ordinance, which is to provide accountability, transparency, and oversight regarding the acquisition and use of surveillance technology and surveillance data by the City of Boston and its agencies and officers. The second chapter provides general considerations of the ordinance. Section 2 provides for definitions of important terms that are used throughout the ordinances. The terms defined include surveillance technology, surveillance data, exigent circumstance, and student reports. Section 2 provides for exceptions and exemptions to the ordinance. In Section 2, a narrow exigent circumstances exemption allows the police department to use unapproved surveillance technology without prior approval from the City Council, but subject to very strict reporting requirements and time limits. The third chapter provides for the main provisions of the community control over surveillance. Section 3 creates the surveillance use policy and describes its required elements. Section 4 creates the surveillance technology impact reports and technology-specific surveillance use policies and describes their main characteristics. All these documents must be filed by the city before deciding to use new surveillance technologies and then be approved by the City Council after a hearing where the community can provide its input. The fourth chapter deals with the student information sharing policies. Section 5 lays out specific rules pertaining to Boston Public Schools and Boston Police Department. information sharing policies and practices. This will be further explained by the other panelists. The 5th chapter and section 5 of the ordinance creates the annual surveillance report to be presented by the mayor to the council every year and establishes its main elements. The last chapter provides for miscellaneous provisions. Section 7 provides for enforcement mechanisms of the ordinance. These mechanisms include the exclusionary rule and a private right of action. Section 8, provides a severability clause so that the ordinance remains in force even if some portions are declared invalid. Finally, Section 9 deals with the effective date of the ordinance and its sections. Basically, what we are saying today is that sunlight is the best disinfectant. The city of Boston took a very important step towards reining in an accountable government spying when it banned face surveillance earlier this year. Now, the city should continue on that road and join other cities in Massachusetts, like Somerville and Cambridge, and pass this surveillance oversight ordinance. Every generation must fight for their freedoms. This ordinance creates opportunities for future generations to continue the fight for racial justice, privacy, and freedom of speech in the digital age. Thank you very much for your attention and your consideration.
Thank you very much. I think it was Nora next.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Nora Paul Schultz. I'm a physics teacher at the O'Brien School, a leader of Unafraid Educators, the Boston Teacher Union's Immigrant Rights Organizing Committee, and a resident of Jamaica Plain. Unafraid Educators has at its mission to build sanctuary schools from the ground up. In the wake of the 2016 election, many cities and school districts began proclaiming themselves to be sanctuary cities and sanctuary districts. Then Councillor Tito Jackson spearheaded the work to pass a resolution to proclaim Boston Public Schools a sanctuary district. I attended the hearing and watched as fellow Unafraid Educators testified in support of this resolution. But calling ourselves a sanctuary district does not mean anything without action. As a group, we in Unafraid Educators realized that we needed to continue to push the district in our schools to truly live up to this name. After all, can we really call ourselves a sanctuary district when incident reports written by district employees end up in the hands of ICE and result in the deportation of students in our care? The ordinance before you is a step towards living out the promise we all made through the 2016 resolution. Let us be clear. When the resolution was written, the way that the interactions between ICE and schools was imagined was of ICE agents coming into schools and detaining a student. This is a terrifying image and one that has not, luckily, as far as I know, come to fruition in Boston. What we have seen in Boston is something not as obvious, but equally sinister. In Boston, here's what we know happened. Information about students is obtained by Boston school police officers and passed to the Boston Police Department. From there, the information is shared with the Boston Regional Intelligence Center and making it accessible to ICE and other federal entities. There was a public case shared by WBUR in 2018, which told the devastating story of a young man, a BPS student, being deported using information from our schools. But we knew from the beginning that this was not a one-time tragedy. Immigration lawyers, some of whom you will hear here today, told a larger story. Later that same year, a lawsuit filed that same year has revealed that over 100 reports were passed from BPS to BRIC between 2014 and 2017, allowing ICE to have access to them. This was a staggering number, but still not the full picture. We recently heard from the lawyers who were part of the 2018 suit that incident reports were passed to BRIC as late as during the 2019-2020 school year. And the issue is much broader. We know that the passing of information is not limited to sending incident reports. We know that there is unofficial communications, including seemingly casual emails that can and do incriminate students. In a recent records request, we learned of a BRIC list that school police officers are on, which suggests a standard network of communication between the BRIC and the school police. The communication at times is very specific. We have seen examples of school police officers sending emails to people at the BRIC identifying students in photos and sending their information along. We also need to be clear that this does not just affect our undocumented students. The BRIC communicates with other law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, which is known to surveil Muslims. The BRIC also houses the gang database, which includes unsubstantiated and criminalizing information about our city's residents. It bears repeating that over 90% of the people in the gang database are Black and Latinx. Over 60% are Black men. As a teacher, this communication is frankly terrifying as it endangers our students. Additionally, it makes it harder for me to do my job in supporting and educating my students. How can I expect an undocumented student or a citizen student with undocumented family members to open up to me and ask for support if their family member is detained? How can I expect an undocumented student or a student with irregular status to ask me for help in navigating the complicated college process? Why would any student share this sensitive information with anyone at a school if they have good reason to fear that information from schools is being passed to the BPD and on to federal law enforcement agencies? Of course, the stakes are high for undocumented students and their families, but they are high for citizen families as well, as citizen students can also be inserted into the gang database and funneled into the criminal justice system. If there is a fight in my classroom, for example, I need support. While I teach the other students in my class, I need someone to talk to the students in question and allow them to cool down and then have conversations to restore their relationship. Currently, I do not feel comfortable calling the office and asking for help because a school police officer might be the person to show up. How can I live with myself if an incident report from this confrontation ends up incriminating one of my students? Section 5 of this ordinance attempts to create clear guidelines to minimize the information that is shared between BPS and BPD and center the students in caring about their future. Through our advocacy, we have called this language the Learn Without Fear policy because ultimately we want to create schools where students can learn without fear of being criminalized. The policy creates guidelines for when a report should be written that can be shared with BPD. The incidents must be severe bodily harm, a true and credible threat amounting to criminal predicate, possession of a firearm, or possession of drugs such that are not marijuana, nicotine, or alcohol. This is not to say that any incident less severe should not have consequences. Instead, I believe these consequences should be school-based and not lead to the criminalization of a young person. Our schools should be places where students can make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. How can we allow mistakes that are often seen as kids being kids in white affluent schools lead to the criminalization or deportation in our schools? There is a new BPS policy on the issue of information sharing, but this policy is insufficient. It gives a too broad definition for what type of incident can lead to a report going to BPD. And perhaps the most horrifying aspect is that the only reports that school police officers are allowed to write are BPD 1.1 reports, which go directly to BPD and feed directly into the BRIC. They are able to write these reports with no oversight, no one checking if the incident is worthy of a BPD report or if the information shared should have been. This policy also puts limits on what information can go into reports going to BPS and BPD so that BPS employees cannot share sensitive information like immigration status or religion, or even information that can be proxy for those things like nationality, first language, or participation in clubs. It is important that this information is not freely shared between the district and the police department. This section of the ordinance also provides an oversight for when reports are passed to BPD. This requires a school leader to use their educational lens to deem if a report should be submitted to the BPD. It would also require the superintendent and their council to ensure that the report meets the requirements of the ordinance. It also requires a meeting with the student and their family prior to the sending of the report, schools would also have to provide an interpreter if necessary, and a list of legal services. It also requires a community oversight board to restore the trust in the community and monitor the racial, gender, school, and other breakdowns of the reports that were sent to BPD. I'm attaching to this testimony some suggested amendments that all the members of this panel are proposing that will allow for exigent circumstances and prevent school leaders from sharing this information as well. I dream of teaching in a school where students can learn from their mistakes without worrying that they will be used against them and lead to their criminalization or deportation. I know that this ordinance is an important step in making that happen. So I thank all of you for taking this issue so seriously. I'm happy to answer questions when it comes to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I think we had Valeria.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you all for your time. I'm very happy to be here today. I share a lot of the sentiments that you all shared. That's just finally happening. So I'm here before you as a DACA recipient, a Boston Public Schools graduate, a family member of a BPS student, and also a civilian who has been in contact with the police enough times to know when they are helping and protecting me and my family and others around me, and when they are abusing their power and instilling fear and harm. So today you will hear from our members from the student immigrant movement as well. And so I want to let you know a little bit about us. The student immigrant movement was founded in 2005 by young people here in Massachusetts, particularly East Boston High School students at the time, fighting for their lives and their families' lives as undocumented and immigrant people. For 15 years, SIM has done groundbreaking work for not only the immigrant community, but the community at large, because we know that when you help the most vulnerable of people, you are helping everyone else. From stopping deportations to doing popular education around civil rights, college access, and everything in between, we have served as a political home and an organizing home for young people 13 to 29 to develop themselves and learn about their community and how they can inspire change and create change. So SIM has always been concerned with the disparities that our members have shared and experienced over the years, in particular within the Boston Public School system. And in fact, this is what led to the founding of Unafraid Educators, was that when we as students and as SIM members had discovered that the administrators knew of the issues we were facing, but refused to take action, we decided that it was appropriate to organize with the willing and concerned teachers that wanted to also see their students be successful and took it upon themselves to fill those disparities when the administration did not. So I'm very happy that we have Unafraid Educators with us here as well, fighting this good fight, as well as the ACLU. As I mentioned, we've been particularly concerned with Boston, in particular East Boston High School as well. But we worked with thousands of schools throughout the state and throughout Boston Public Schools, including BINCA, the Boston International Newcomers Academy, that go above and beyond to educate and protect their marginalized students. But even they have been found in the reports obtained through lawsuits against BPS. I mentioned these folks not to put them on the spot, but to focus that it's not just an East Boston High School problem. But the reason why we focus so much on East Boston High School is that it has been one of the longest battles that SIM in particular has faced, as well as other immigrant lawyers and advocates who have continuously tried to be part of the community there and help the immigrant population there, and have been systematically shut down. We are banned from actually even talking to the students, trying to help them. So we know this is true about other administrations in BPS as well. We know that that's not the only school. And so what we recognize is that this is this racial inequity, this racial and class inequity is in truth a systematic issue. And so that's why we actually approached Tommy Chang back in 2016 to discuss potential trainings and ways to go about bridging these gaps with the administrators, the police officers, principals, and so on. And at the time, Tommy Chang assured us over and over again that our concerns were regarding one-time incidents, that we shouldn't worry, and that it was all under control. And for a while, we truly believed that was true, that BPS was simply a victim or happened to have a mishap because of BPD's pervasive tactics and strategies. Then, as you heard from my colleagues earlier, in 2018 and 2017, and even beyond and even later, unfortunately, we learned that that wasn't true. These weren't one-time incidents. Kids weren't ending up in gang databases for posting pictures with their friends, wearing their favorite sports gear by accident. They weren't being stopped, questioned over time by accident. There weren't multiple reports being captured on a regular daily basis of these youth activities and the use of these reports instigating suspicion where suspicion wasn't existent. This wasn't an accident. And the neglect to inform, to include families, the due process of young people and their families was not an accident. This was on purpose. This was a choice by the parties involved to do these things. And so we approached Dr. Casilius, the new superintendent of Boston Public Schools, hoping that this time, with a new head of the administration, the issue would be resolved. And this time we came with more evidence and more research that appalled us. Policies that were out of date, policies that were non-existent, and we took it upon ourselves to make the work easier for them by drafting the Learn Without Fear policy with the hope that not only were we going to be able to have these very frank conversations about the real issues that were happening in BPS, but that they would also take our policy seriously. And over time, as we met very frequently, almost one time per month from 2019 to now. For a very long period of time, we would meet over and over again, and we wouldn't hear that our policy was being taken seriously. And so that prompted us to then go public and be more outspoken, because we had tried to compromise. We had tried to take matters, inside closed doors. And so we began to testify weekly on a regular basis at the school committee hearings. And we began to organize with other folks to also try to resolve this issue. And that's when BPS finally agreed and heard us to convene a working group where we examined the policy that we had drafted. Unfortunately, over and over again, we were refused answers to very valid questions that we had. They would not talk about our policy in terms of whether it was legal or not. We received inadequate answers, to say the least. And it became very clear to us that this was just a process they were putting in place to showcase or attempt to show that they were trying to resolve the issue, when in reality they were not, and they knew all along that they were not. And so that led to us passing a version of the Learn Without Fear policy that I'm actually embarrassed to claim as a version of the Learn Without Fear policy that almost did nothing to the extent that we wished it would. And so at the end of the day, what I understand is that BPS is willingly doing this, willingly working with BPD. And in fact, once the working group ended and the policy was passed, we were promised that we would be called on to reconvene, to continue this conversation, because it was a long conversation and that we could not simply fix everything through one policy. Now, we agreed full-heartedly with that, which is why we had hoped that the policy would set the stage to actually set the structure for what these conversations would be like. And over again, they dismissed our concerns, claiming that this was a training issue. However, we also know that in fact, training has not taken place on a regular basis, and we cannot depend solely on training to happen, because we need some form of legal process that will hold anything that falls through the crack accountable. And currently we don't have that in place. I am deeply concerned by the new evidence that we've obtained that shows that the emails and ongoing conversations have happened even after we were in this working group 3-4 months ago, being assured that this was no longer happening. Clearly, I don't want to sugarcoat it. We were lied to, blatantly lied to. I'm concerned as a former student, as a family member, and as someone who is responsible or feels responsible for our members who are Boston Public Schools. And so today you'll hear from our members, and they will talk, a lot about why they support the policy. But what I want to let you know, and what you will not see, is how frightened they were to even talk, to even speak and prepare their speeches for you, how their family members urge them constantly to not be too public, to not testify. What you will not see is the countless calls that they made to recruit people who potentially could share their experiences. And this is all because of fear, because they fear that by being too specific, by giving too many details, by saying the wrong thing, that there will be repercussions. This is not a way that a democracy should function. This is a way that our voices are systematically being shut down. And I also want to say it is not surprising to me that the administrations were not present. They do know full-heartedly and what we have been saying, what we have been asking for, and they have refused to come to the table with us unless we coerce them into. As well as I want to mention that, I hear over and over comments by the Boston Police Department as well as Commissioner Gross that these technologies are helping sexual assault victims, that they are helping solve murders, that they're helping the families. And I want to tell you, as a survivor of sexual assault, as a survivor of robberies and break-ins in my home, like I said before, I understand when the police are being helpful. And I also have experienced instances where they were not, where they made me feel fear, where they made me feel that I wasn't in the right place, where they asked me questions that I knew they didn't need to know, like my ethnicity. These are questions that other people get, and even worse, things happen to them when they are stopped and frisked or even detained and even deported. And so I want to highlight that these issues do not just happen to immigrants, but the whole entire community of marginalized people out there. And I want to really make sure that you all focus in on this larger picture as well, in addition to the specific details of the language of the policy. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kamani?
Good afternoon, City Council members, panelists, and to all those watching. My name is Kamani James, and I'm a senior at Boston Latin Academy, a Boston Student Advisory Council representative, and the current student representative on the Boston School Committee. When I was asked to testify before you all on the issue of student privacy and information sharing, I initially thought to write a somewhat long-winded testimony that laid out each and every issue surrounding the ordinance, persuading you all to support it and push it to be signed into law, which, for the record, it should be. But seeing as my other panelists have done an excellent job at elucidating the specifics of the present proposal, I'd like to reframe this issue in the context of what I see as a larger issue in our present political culture, and to that end, would like to offer these remarks instead. I worked on the student privacy policy the district passed in September for pretty much my entire summer. And at my first school committee meeting, I strongly expressed my disagreement with the policy as it was written at the time for reasons outlined in a letter, which many of us working group members signed on to. I was then told that I shouldn't, quote, remind folks what was wrong with or missing from the policy since it was apparently common knowledge. The policy the district passed was woefully inadequate. It institutionalized the use of BPD 11 reports for too many offenses and misdemeanors, diminishing protections amongst our most vulnerable students. It allowed confirmed gang affiliation to be included in reports, strengthening the bridge between school police officers and BPD, therefore defeating our goals in creating the policy in the first place. And finally, but most importantly, it failed to restrict the flow of information through unofficial channels between ICE, BPD, and BPS officials, which has occurred as recently as January of this year, and even more recently, as my fellow panelists have stated. This ordinance, and more specifically, Section 5 of the ordinance, directly addresses the deficiencies and clearly articulates potential solutions. As it stands now, SIM and Unafraid educators have put in more work than anyone else to create an anti-racist, just policy that would protect our students' learning and safety. So since it's clear why we should pass this policy, common sense and basic human decency tell us as much, let us address the elephant in the room: politics. It's no surprise that Boston has a long history of practicing politics in a distinctly covert way, one in which elected officials and others exercising political power all too frequently attempt to usurp power from those community organizers and activists who are actively on the ground doing the work, necessary work, to improve the lives of everyday Bostonians. This power struggle has created a political climate which tolerates and contributes to community neglect, and I and many other students are tired of it. It's too bold, they say. These groups of people wouldn't be for it, they say. Well, that group of people have been benefiting from the system for quite some time, the system they created. What about the minorities who've been ignored, whose children and loved ones have been actively repressed and disenfranchised by this system? We knew for years what really needed to be done around this issue, and it's November of 2020. It is November of 2020. Some may say change takes a long time. Yes, I agree. But I wonder how much influence this ineffective political system has had on that timeline, and what could get done sooner if people started opening their ears and truly listening to our community members, specifically the most disadvantaged by this system. Politics was not meant to function this way. The secrecy, obfuscation, lack of transparency, and absence of political will haven't done anything for us except make community members more frustrated and disappointed with their elected officials. And it's time that we start thinking it's time we start taking our leaders to task for their failures. It's time to demand more from our elected officials. It's time to demand accountability. City councilors, you have before you an opportunity to end the ambiguity surrounding the use of surveillance technologies and to build a more transparent, accountable, and courageous political climate. It is for these reasons that I implore you to pass this ordinance. By establishing community oversight of surveillance technologies, it will protect the privacy of our students' data and information. And in crafting clearer language about information sharing, it will limit the extent to which police and schools can collaborate with ICE and other federal law enforcement agencies which jeopardize our students' safety. Students should not have to walk around their schools afraid, worried about both a calculus test and their next period class, and whether or not the school police officer standing in the corner is spying on them, recording the details of their interactions to later send to other government agencies. This is outrageous. Passing this ordinance is the next essential step towards creating a more equitable, safe environment, one in which school police officers don't act as accessories to federal immigration authorities. Surveillance technologies are not used with oversight. Don't act as accessories to federal immigration authorities. Surveillance technologies are not used without oversight, and students are given every opportunity to learn without fear. Again, I implore you all to pass this ordinance because it's not just the political right thing to do or because it's politically controversial. It is pure human decency. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go now through a line of questions from the counselors, questions and comments, and then we will go to public testimony. So again, starting with the lead sponsors, I think we started with Counselor Janey, then Arroyo, and then Wu.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I want to just take a moment to thank this amazing panel. Each and every one of you have kind of laid it out. And so just thank you for your ongoing work, your ongoing advocacy. Mr. James, you just kind of, I think, summed it up nicely about the urgency for this matter. And certainly the co-sponsors, and I would argue many of my colleagues, are very supportive of this, and that's why we've introduced it and we want to pass it. You know, Madam Chair, most of my questions were very much directed toward the administration. And first and foremost, I think it's really important to understand where they are. I share, again, I said in my opening how disappointed I am that they're not here. I'm disappointed that we're talking about they can't be here because of the election that was a week ago and is already called. So I'm not sure what the issue is. That the ordinance itself is very dense, but it's been filed months ago. And as Councillor Wu has pointed out, this is not a new conversation. This is an ongoing conversation, one in which we hope to push forward through the council and get signed by the mayor, this ordinance, this legislative cycle. So again, it's disappointing not to be able to have a clear understanding of where the administration is. From what I can gather, the panel that is before us and many of the advocates, and I'm sure we'll hear testimony from the public, very supportive of this. And without really understanding what issues are issues of concern, what issues might rub against, you know, our legal department, what issues they really like, it's really hard to move forward. And so I'm disappointed. Let me just kind of look through some of the questions, I think, for the panelists here to see if there's someone here. We also need to figure, I just saw your text, Madam Chair. So, you know, most of my questions were to the administration, really wanting to understand, here's language, this is legislation, and we're really at the end of our legislative cycle in terms of our, you know, ability to get it through. And so not having them here to say, here's what we like, here's what we have questions about, here's what we're concerned about, is, I don't know what to do with that. Other than I would hope that we could schedule a working session soon, immediately, to get to have that conversation. And because this is a conversation where we are seeking accountability, we are seeking transparency, I really want to do that in a public space. I am not interested in having private conversations with the mayor and going back and forth with different, I mean, I will do that. I don't want to say I'm not interested in talking with the mayor. Clearly I am, but I really feel like we, as a city, we as particularly advocates who have spent so much time and effort putting in work here, we just as a city deserve a public debate about this. And so I hope, Madam Chair, that we can get a working session scheduled immediately. My hope is that we'll have a date that works. I mean, I think it's very telling that we didn't have BPD or the school department here, so I'm not sure. I know the schools were closed on Election Day. I'm not sure why we don't have someone from our schools here to talk about this, but clearly, for all of the reasons that have been outlined by our amazing panel, I mean, the data points we don't have to report, we already know that there is too much reporting already happening between all of these different public agencies, and that all of this reporting and surveillance is being done in the name of safety. But let me pose this again. People in my community, to people I rep, we don't feel any safer. So I don't see how we're solving, how the murder, our solve rate on murders are going down. So it just begs the question, what are we doing? And in my mind, I think we can do something where we are building more trust, where we are not funneling our students, our young people through the school to prison pipeline, and criminalizing our students. I obviously there's room for improvement here, but without the administration to say what they like, what they don't like, you know, I don't know where to go from here. I'm going to stop talking because I know we've got my colleagues, my co-sponsors might want to ask, other colleagues might want to ask questions, and certainly I do want to hear from the public, and I know we're running short on time, and so if I have other questions that are actual questions to this panel, I mean, this panel has been amazing. I just need to know from the administration where can we move from here? We need to move forward. This is legislation. We need to understand what the sticking points are so that we can try to resolve. I believe that there is enough interest, you know, that this body would be interested in passing something, but I'm interested in passing legislation that we can all feel good about. And I want to at least do that with understanding what, if there are concerns, what they are. So that we can try to address them if we think that they make sense, and if not, we can go from there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Arroyo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Most of my questions were for the administration, but I guess in lacking their presence, I do know that one of the reasons offered in a letter to us today by the Office of Intergovernmental Relations is that it conflicts with that there's the idea that this changes policies that were recently adopted. In other words, I believe Mr. James did a great job outlining what came out of the Boston School Committee and those discussions. And so my one question here, because I believe everybody on this panel has actually read or took part in the process for that proposal that came out of the Boston School Committee. Is that accurate? All right, I'm seeing all head nods. Okay. In what ways, because I think fundamentally what this comes down to for me is what protects our children the most? What protects our residents the most? And for me, that's why I'm the lead sponsor on this, because I believe this actually tightens up that legislation in a way that actually protects them, along with you all and with President Janey and Councilor Wu. But if you can speak to anybody, any of you can take this question, the ways in which you believe that this ordinance does a better job protecting our students in our schools than what we currently have, and why we should pass this and work on passing this, even though that has already been done. And that's it. That's all my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I can start, and then Valeria and Kamani were also on the panel. Is that okay? We're also on the working group that helped write the policy, and I know Emiliano has also read it and given feedback, and there's other people who will testify today who are also on it. I think that there were some real sticking points in the working group of places where, as a group, we just could not, there was a number of us who just could not agree with the district in terms of what types of incidents should require a report, and that what kind of those reports they are. And so in the new policy, it requires that a BPD 1.1, which is a BPD report that goes into the BPD system, and the school department loses access to it. So cannot even tell us how many BPD reports were written. And my jaw was on the ground when I heard that there were reports that the school district doesn't have account to. And their requirements for what can require 1.1 are it's too easy to write one. And so there's things like assault and battery, or assault and battery with a deadly weapon, which while sound like extreme and can be extreme and hurtful actions, can also be written up for more minor offenses like a shoving match. Or we heard a story of someone kicking a flip-flop at someone else was written up as assault and battery with a deadly weapon because the flip-flop was considered a deadly weapon. And I'm not a lawyer, this is just what I've learned from lawyers, but hearing from lawyers who were on the committee with us, Liz McGuire and Elizabeth Badger, who will testify during public comment, they both talked about these stories of their clients having reports written for that. Liz McGuire also talked about an autistic kid who got obsessed with someone getting written up for a stalking charge. And that's something else that can still require 1.1, or sexual harassment, which all these things are really bad and can be really bad, but some of them require something that's not a BPD report, or maybe many of them do. And so one of our big concerns was this glaring line of like what requires a report and why is that a report that no one has to okay, gets written right into the BPD system and is basically lost to the school district. And so there's no oversight from a head of school to be like, hey, I don't think that this incident actually warrants this information. They have to tell the head of school that they're writing the report, but the head of school doesn't okay it, which is something that our policy does. Another big thing is that it says that information sharing cannot happen for non-reports, except for through the chief and the deputy chief. But all of our list of items that can't be included in a report, they can include all those except for immigration status if they see it to be a health and safety emergency, or if just they pick up the phone or send an email to someone. There was other things like it does not account for a confirmed gang status, and we've seen in emails that they'll say, oh, the kids said that they were a gang member, therefore they are. But those are just some of the main ones, along with the parent meetings happening before the incident is shared with the BPD. And Valeria and Kamani, let me know if I'm missing anything, and I can send you, and I think we did send you a list that we sent to school committee with these concerns that were signed by many members of the working group.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is that, you know, we tried really hard to put in place a process that really flipped the situation from having to involve law enforcement to actually dealing with matters within the school and between administrators and teachers and the principal, and then most importantly, the families, because the whole entire time, regardless of any of the different evidence that you're seeing, all of it doesn't include the family at all. There's no like, you know, let's call an interpreter, let's get a lawyer here to actually explain to the family the consequences of, you know, writing up this thing. And, you know, I think it is important to note that there is a full out process, right, that was decided through the Supreme Court around suspension. And what we're seeing here, these things do not merit suspension. And so why are they meriting such harsher consequences than an actual suspension where you know, children, kids are ending up either deported or in prison or in gang databases that are gonna, you know, unfortunately harm them their entire lives when they're just starting their lives now. And so I think that's one of the things that we really tried to do, and it was really difficult, and BPS was really adamant and pushed back a lot on creating this type of process that really just contains the incidents to the school level. And the other thing I would say is that there's a lot of lack of transparency. So what would happen is we wrote the policy, we would come to the meeting, and then we would get contradicting information. So eventually it got to the point where we would be in a meeting and be like, wait, you just said that they don't have access to this. Now they do have access to it. And it would be this thing of like, we wouldn't get any work done or anywhere or progress, because I think right now there's not even a concrete list of the types of incident reports that exist, what they are for, the definitions. They attempted to provide one to us, but we knew that it was lacking as well on, you know, credibility and also transparency, that they just were choosing to not share certain things, as well as choosing not to share the extent of their connection to BPD, where BPD also gave, and they would give, BPS would also give this reasoning, which is, oh, it's just part of the 300A rule. And so upon investigating what is the 300A rule, all of a sudden we couldn't find this rule. We didn't know if it was out of date, like the Memorandum of Understanding is, because it's from 1996, right? As well as how it's out of date with the Criminal Justice Reform Act. So is 300A out of compliance as well? We don't know because they wouldn't provide it to us. They wouldn't tell us details about it. And so we would get all of these responses of, well, we can't include that in the policy because it's legally, like we legally can't do it, or we just can't do it because of BPD. And there would be no further explanation. And it just got to the point where we knew that's not the case. It's just a matter of will and a matter of, you know, ultimately we ended up asking the question, like, is Boston Public Schools role the role of the police or the role of educators, right? To teach our young people, you know, how to be in society, how to create change and educate them. So I would just say that was some of the difficult portions, but yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I just, pardon, I just wanted to say that I completely agree with Nora and Valeria. I think they summed it up beautifully. I just want to highlight everything that they said. And I would just add that, you know, for me, it was the lack of political will, because there would be times when us members of the working group would push for certain language to be added to the policy in order to actually begin to take power away from school police officers that they were misusing against students. And there were very few times, barely any time, when we would get an actual legal answer as to why that language couldn't be included, while most of the time it was reasonings, like Valeria said, that were just, you know, BPD, we can't do that. BPD essentially wouldn't like that. And it was very frustrating to work through negotiations where we weren't being provided an actual legitimate legal reason as to why certain language couldn't be put into a policy that's supposed to be protecting our students. And, you know, that this is the whole point of the testimony that I made earlier to you all today. This is about our students. You know, every single meeting in the summertime, I had to remind the district leaders about that. This is about our students. I think once we begin to weigh political factors and what certain law enforcement agencies will and will not like, when really they're the issue and they're the ones that are making our students feel unsafe, we begin to lose focus of why we're doing the work in the first place. This is for our students. This is for our students to feel safe. This is for your children who are attending BPS schools. This is for my cousins who are going to be in BPS for the next 12 to 15 years. This is serious. This is a policy that is going to transform the way schools are, the environment in which we're putting our students and children in. And it's going to be the first step to asking the larger question of why police officers are in schools in the first place. And my main issue with the policy is the fact that a lot of, you know, the district leaders during the working group, a lot of it was, oh, we'll leave it up to training. Well, how can we leave it up to training when we don't have specific language included in the policy that would shed light, essentially, and give more direction to where that training should go and how that training should be executed effectively. So every aspect of the policy isn't just being followed, but also being applied fairly and justly in a case-by-case scenario.
Thank you all. And I just want to confirm, I was a public defender. I did do many cases. The assault and battery with a dangerous or deadly weapon, the worst one I ever got was a paper plate. That was a 2-wit paper plate. So it's possible that they do write them for different things. I just want to confirm as a criminal defense attorney that has happened and does happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Councilor Flynn and Councilor Braden text me that they might be not available now. So we'll go right to Councilor Bach. Then if Councilor O'Malley's not here, we'll go to Campbell, then Mejia.
Oh, and Councilor Edwards, I'm still here too.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Wu. First, Councilor Wu. My apologies.
No, I'm sorry. I'll be quick. I just wanted to say thank you so much to this panel. Again, I know how much you put into it, and it was just incredibly inspiring to hear all of you, especially Mr. James. Thank you so much for really localizing it and just emphasizing the urgency of what we're trying to do here. I wonder if you all could just comment a little bit, also just kind of zooming out. You know, sometimes we think about Boston as the leader on so many issues that we're standing up on, but this is an area where other cities have actually already done this and it's gone great. So I don't know if folks could talk a little bit about that, just to put it in the big picture context.
I can talk about that. For the experience of the surveillance oversight, so far there are 2 communities in Massachusetts that have passed similar ordinances, which are Lawrence, Somerville, and Cambridge. And the process is going, it's going well. We are working a lot with Somerville and Cambridge because the effective date of the ordinances usually is from 6 months to 9 months after it's passed. We are working with them to create a good surveillance use policy, to analyze the surveillance technology impact reports, which we think are super important because that's where the technology is explained. We are also working with the police departments there so that they provide all the details about how the surveillance technology works, how what civil rights and civil liberties are affected, where they're deployed. So I can speak to that, and I can say that while at the beginning it's a little bit hard for cities to get used to it, I think they will eventually. And we of course can work with the city of Boston to help them and to provide our resources for anything the city needs if this ordinance passes. Thank you very much, Councillor Wu.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Councillor Wu. I think it's Councillor Bach.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I just want to echo thanks to the panel and also frustration about the fact that we don't have the administration here today, because I think that it is, it's an ordinance in which we should be getting into the weeds, and we have a lot of people here, lots of counselors here who care about getting into the weeds of legislation, and a lot of folks here, including the folks from SIM and Unafraid Educators, who have spent a lot of time in the weeds of this legislation already. And you've brought your expertise to this, and it would be good if we were having a detailed conversation about the language before us with the administration, as so many of you have voiced. So I just want to echo that in my perspective, and say that similarly to my colleagues, a lot of my questions were and will be for the administration, and I hope we'll have that working session shortly. I guess one question I would ask is just, it does seem like we've got sort of 2 aspects of the ordinance here fundamentally. One is about the us sort of progression in surveillance technology and us making that intentional democratic decision about what we're going to use together. And then there's the piece that's specifically about schools and how, as Kamani said, we really treat our students, as children, and with rights, and also people to whom we have a heightened duty of care, which I think involves really avoiding situations in which they're going to be criminalized. And so I just wonder if somebody from the ACLU or anybody on the panel could speak a little bit to putting those 2 things together in the ordinance, because obviously we separated out the facial surveillance ban, and I could imagine a world in which we were talking about 2 ordinances here. So just would love to hear a little bit about that thought of having them all together.
I can speak to that also if panelists want. So we think that surveillance is an overall concern, right? The reason why the face surveillance ban it was done through a separate ordinance was because in that case, a whole technology was being banned, right? As contrary, in these cases, this surveillance technology should be approved by the city council. That's why we are creating this surveillance ordinance, surveillance oversight ordinance. And the reason why we put the public schools section is because the surveillance in public schools is a big issue in surveillance in the city of Boston. And we think that the information sharing part of the ordinance that pertains to the Boston public schools is essential for regulating surveillance in the city of Boston. As a matter of fact, the whole surveillance has information sharing provisions. It's not only the information sharing provisions in the schools section, but also the city council should, under the ordinance, will be able to approve any information sharing between the city of Boston, any agency of the city of Boston, including police department, and other local, state, or federal agencies. Thank you for the question. I hope.
Councillor Bach, is that good?
I'm happy to I appreciated that, but also happy to hear from the other panelists.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
just want people know before we go, we have about a half hour before we're probably, and we still have public testimony as well. So while I appreciate the back and forth and each panelist having a lot to add to, I do want to prioritize other counselors who haven't asked a question at all, and also get to public testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to end my questions.
Thank you. Counselor Campbell?
Thank you, Counselor Edwards. And thank you also
I'm sorry, we've also been joined by Counselor Flaherty.
Oh, thank you, Counselor Edwards. But thank you to the panelists who I've been engaging with respect to other public safety conversations, including the gang database, BRIC, the lack of transparency and accountability. So appreciate your leadership, your advocacy. Also share your frustration. I think there is an unwillingness, I'll be very frank, an unwillingness by the departments to sort of own when we make a mistake and to admit to the harm we cause. And then, of course, to change our policies and practices to then do better. And if we're unwilling, if we continue to take this defensive posture, right, we'll continue to be here day after day after day. So I think it's not just let's get the ordinance passed. We have to sort of shift that culture within departments, including the policing department, including some parts of BPD. I remember just handling school discipline and special needs cases as an education attorney. And it was always combative with, for the most part, with the Boston Public Schools with respect to anytime we got information that we knew was inaccurate, misinformation, and trying to sort of save one of our students. So appreciate your leadership. I'm curious, and this is just one question, for the municipalities that have passed this legislation, what has come out of it, right? What are advocates saying is working? What maybe had to be tweaked? What was the sentiment of their police departments, right? Of their school departments when passing this legislation? I imagine there was a process of back and forth. Maybe there was some compromise, I don't know. But I'm curious what the hiccups were for some and how those departments got past that. And then what has been the end result or the outcome, and if any shifts in culture in some of these departments and other municipalities have taken place because of this legislation.
I can answer to that. Thank you for the question, Councillor Campbell. As to the surveillance ordinance, the surveillance part, that's the one we passed in Cambridge and Somerville. So the actual implementation of the ordinance, once this ordinance is passed, is composed mainly of two parts. Actually, like one part, and then the ordinance actually working. So between the ordinance is passed and the ordinance takes effect, that's the part where the cities and towns have to work harder, because that's when they have to draft the surveillance use policy. They have to draft all the surveillance technology impact reports, prepare the format and the template for all the policies and all the reports that are created by the ordinance. So that's where we are now in Cambridge and Somerville. We are in that part. And so far it's working. There is some back and forth, of course, with the police departments about the amount of work, about the things that should be included in the surveillance use policy, how detailed they should be. But this is not something that's impossible to be done. It can be done. It just requires a little bit of more administrative work during the first part of implementation. But once that is done, then it's pretty automatic. It's basically the police department or any other local agency filling forms and templates in a complete way, in a very detailed way, but it's just filling those forms. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My other questions are for the administration. I can save them for the working session. And again, thank you to the advocates, and Mr. James, of course, as well, for all of your work. Thank you. Stay safe and healthy.
Councilor Mejia, then Councilor Flaherty.
Yes, I'm going to join the chorus of how disappointed I am that the administration is not here to participate and be present. I think that it's such a missed opportunity. I feel like I'm speaking to folks who I've known forever, right? And having the same conversation with folks who are already on the same accord with me. So it's just a little bit frustrating. that this is what the case is. But I think a few things that I just want to uplift here is that in many ways, this feels like the plantation mentality, right? It feels as though we're always being watched, always being surveilled. And I think that this whole mentality of keeping people in check does really weigh on you emotionally. And I'm just curious in terms of the social and emotional trauma that our students are facing as a result of always feeling like they're being watched. I'm just curious if there's any data or any information around the social and emotional and traumatic impact that being overly surveilled, I guess if that's a word, has on you. I know for me, whenever I go to a store, I already know I'm being watched. I can feel those eyes on me, and I swear to God, the heat is so close on my back that I just want to leave. And the fact that I walk into spaces and already feel like all eyes are on me makes me feel a certain kind of way. And I'm an adult. So I'm just curious about what have you heard or have learned about the social and emotional impact and trauma that being overly surveillance has on young people. Can anyone speak to that in terms of the trauma, if it exists?
Well, Councillor Mejia, while I don't have quantitative data to provide to you at the moment, I'm pretty sure one of my fellow panelists do. I can speak to experiences that I personally learned of in during the working group sessions over the summer, and some of the experiences I've actually been told very personally throughout my work on the Boston School Committee. And I addressed this in my testimony earlier. When you have a student, you wake up in the morning, it's already early, so you're feeling groggy. You have 2, probably 3 tests that school day. You go into school, you probably have your headphones in your ears, and you're thinking about the tests plural that you have coming up that day are stressing you out. You may have some issues going on at home. You may have responsibilities later in the day or later in the week that you're dreading. And then on top of all of that, on top of the responsibilities of a student, the societal pressures of a teenager, you have to also consider the fact that there is a police officer in your school watching the students walking in the hallways, most likely taking notes on what they're wearing. And that's another thing. You wake up in the morning, should I wear red? Or is red going to come off as associating with a certain gang? You have school police, you have students fearing school police officers taking notes of what they're wearing, taking notes of who they're talking to. Oh, I've heard this person does X, Y, and Z. Maybe it's not such a good call for me to be talking to this person in front of this school police officer. You have to constantly watch your every single move in fear that a law enforcement officer is going to take note of that and then sort of form their own conclusion, their own baseless conclusion off of those interactions, off of those biased observations, and then send your information to higher law enforcement agencies that could then get you into, I don't want to say trouble, but get you into a situation that is just built off of baseless conclusions. And I think, it sounds really crazy. It sounds really crazy. I can't find another adjective to describe what I just outlined, because I think that's really the only adjective there is. This is crazy. We're talking about our children. We're talking about students. This is basic human decency. And the amount of pressure that students are already under. I mean, I'm the student representative. I'm the student representative on the Boston Student Advisory Council and on the Boston School Committee. I take 4 APs plus a college preparatory class, and I'm spread thin in many different directions because I love the work that I do, and I want to, be everywhere at once and talk to everyone and solve so many different issues. Now, imagine if I was in school and I had to wake up in the morning and not just think twice, maybe 3 times about what I have to wear, but then go into the school building and fear that the school police officer is just, due to the day in time, and maybe the school police officer woke up in a bad mood, I am subject to subjectivity of a law enforcement officer. That in itself is not only scary and frustrating, but it's crazy. It's crazy because it's counterintuitive to what the school environment is supposed to provide to their children.
I can speak on the immigrant piece, but I understand if we have to move forward.
If you have some cognitive, or if you have some, I don't know, studies, that would be very helpful. I don't want to that you don't speak, but I just, we have about 15-ish minutes. I'm trying to find a colleague who might be able to continue on. So
I'll be brief then. I mean, I could send it later. It's available online easily as well, but I can't tell you the name right now because there's a few. But in terms of immigrant youth in particular, there's little research, first of all, and most of it is qualitative. It's ethnographic based, and it focuses mostly on health impacts, and it does explore mental health impacts on a population who is constantly under fear of deportation. And so one of the things that we see a lot is, first of all, people will over time not speak to their teachers when they need to. And so it creates a mistrust that if I share any type of information at all, if I share that because I'm facing issues or problems, both grade-wise, school-wise, but also personal, because of my documentation status, because of the lack of information my family has, the idea that the students get then is, oh, someone is going to share that information and I'm going to lead to my family being deported. So I could definitely share that research later on, but there's little research, but we see amongst our members and amongst the immigrant population that we have surveyed and have talked to, that there's immense consequences of how they translate their experience in school and outside of school.
Thank you.
I can speak to some actual research that exists. For example, there is a research in England, done in England a couple of years ago, about CCTV that actually shows how people's anxiety levels go up when they're constantly being surveilled. And contrary to this, there is no evidence that CCTV cameras make communities safer. So there is actually evidence against CCTV cameras. Also, there are plenty of research that shows that constant mass surveillance increases stress, have effects on relationships, create conformity among people because they are more prone to accept anything that happens because they are being surveilled. And on top of this, there is decreased trust in government. For example, one study found that when people identified with a leader, their trust in that leader actually decreased when they found out that they were being watched. So constant mass surveillance has deep effects, and there is plenty of research. I can follow up and send you a couple of links about this. But effectively, as the counselor said, mass surveillance and having the constant feeling of having someone surveilling you has a lot of effects in adults, right? Imagine how the effect they have on students that go to schools. Schools should be a safe place for people to learn not to be surveilled. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Councillor Flaherty. And Councillor Flaherty then will continue as Vice Chair of the Government Operations Committee. He will continue on the hearing into public testimony, and again, navigating questions, concerns amongst everyone. And what I do commit to is pushing this and getting it as far as I can this year. Working session, looking directly at the language and the suggestions, as I believe the ACLU has a marked up version of this, and then committed to hearing what the folks in public testimony have concerns about or questions about. And then the working session, we could really, again, give the administration the opportunity to fill in any gaps or express any concerns. As I echo my client or my colleagues' comments, the goal is to get there together. So now I'm going to turn this over to Councillor Flaherty. I see Councillor Braden, you came back. Did you want to go after Councillor Flaherty?
I'm fine. I'll hold my questions for now. I need to catch up on what I missed in the last 45 minutes. So
very well.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Flaherty.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for hosting. And obviously, I'll defer to your comments in terms of our time is short. So I've been listening to the panelists. Look forward to participating in the working session and trying to strike a fair balance as to what is fair and appropriate, and get the administration to engage us at the working session. But more importantly, let's listen to public testimony from folks that have been very patient. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to public testimony, and I can take it from here.
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair. I think she's left. Oh, she's still here.
Thank you, Vice Chair, Councilor Flaherty. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So Kerry, if you could go to the waiting room there and start to allow public testimony, that'd be great.
Hi, Counselor. It's Michelle. I'm going to start letting in the first few signups, which are going to be Abdullahi, Christian, and Clara.
Very good. And thank you, Michelle. Sorry about that. I thought it was Kerry.
No worries.
And so public testimony, if you can, obviously you have the floor, and if you could keep your comments to say 2 minutes, try to get whatever you can get in, so we can get to other folks that are patiently waiting. So the first three have the floor. So Michelle was the first one.
Abdullahi.
Abdullahi. So Abdullahi, you have the floor if you can hear us.
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Abdullahi Gurhan. I came to Boston in 2010 and live in Dorchester. I'm currently a freshman at Wentworth Institute of Technology and graduated this year from O'Brien High School. I'm here today because I'm concerned about BPS allowing students information to be accessible by law enforcement, including the Boston Police Department, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and the FBI. Despite being considered a sanctuary school district, Boston Public Schools seems to be aiding law enforcement agencies with criminalizing and deporting students. Although they aren't giving out information directly, they are still allowing other parties to access them. Schools should be solely about education and not a place to fear being separated from your family or criminalized. I believe that this is not an appropriate role for a school to take. Schools would benefit from allocating this time and resources to other needed areas such as neglected school bathrooms. This does not only affect immigrants living in Boston, but also practicing Muslims such as myself. I do not wish for BPS to help give info to the Boston Police Department, especially since the Boston Police has engaged in programs such as the YPIP or the Youth Police Initiative Plus. This is a program funded by the Department of Homeland Security that recruits Somali youth to interact with Boston Police Department officers. However, this is done with the presumption that Somali youth are inherently violent. The program states, and I quote, "Somali youth are enticed by police officers' capacity to carry weapons, their loyalty, and almost gang-like dress code." Apparently, from what we gathered, the intention is to expand the program to Boston Public Schools at some point. As Somali youth, I found this to be quite offensive and wish for Boston Public Schools to have no part in this program and many others like it. In order to resolve this, I wish for Boston Public Schools to create a policy that limits the information that may be shared with law enforcement agencies. In addition, if any information is to be shared between BPS and law enforcement, that it must be public to any parties involved. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Abdullahi. Michelle, who's next?
Christian, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Christian.
Good afternoon, City Councilors. My name is Christian DeBonsolis. I'm from East Boston and a proud member of the student immigration movement. For years, young people, families, community organizers, educators, and even lawyers have been trying to get answers to important questions about the role of police in the community. There's sufficient proof to believe that because BPS or BSP play a role in reporting and information sharing, serving as an easy access link between schools and law enforcement, young people are being criminalized for normal everyday teen behavior. It is reprehensible, to say the least, how close the relationships are between institutions such as BPS, the BPD, and BRIC, who can share private student information via email about students with little to no rationale as to why they're sharing their information. Not only this, but there's also lack of communication from the police to contact the individual and the family about the information even being shared, which shows a clear lack of transparency between police and the community they're supposed to serve. When kids go to school, the only concern they should have is whether or not they're able to finish their homework in between classes because they were too busy playing video games the night before. They should not be concerned with potentially having their private information shared with various agencies just by being themselves. When people are strolling through their neighborhood, city, or even in their own backyards, they shouldn't have to worry about a drone surveilling them without their consent. We need this ordinance to be adopted now because people should not have to be worried about being watched or possibly reported to state and federal agencies by the BPD or BPS, who are the very people that are supposed to make the community a safer and more secure place. City councilors, I would lastly like to remind you that our city, our state, and our nation as a whole was built on several key ideas. One of them being that power should ultimately be placed in the hands of the people and the communities they live in. The people should decide what should or should not happen within their neighborhoods, cities, and state. However, the actions of the BPD and BPS show a clear disregard for this cardinal idea and their lack of transparency between themselves and the community. With this in mind, I urge you, City Council, really pass this ordinance, which will not only make our communities a safer place, but will make it a place where the people are in charge. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Michelle, who's up next?
Next up, we have Clara, and then after Clara, we're going to have Danya.
Clara, good afternoon and welcome.
Good afternoon, thank you. Hello, City Council. My name is Clara and I live in Boston. I'm a leader of the student immigrant movement and I'm testifying in support of the ordinance on surveillance oversight and information sharing. For years, the community have been trying to get answers to important questions about the role of police in the city. To protect our students, we need to limit the kinds of information Boston Public School and Boston School Police share with the Boston Police Department, which then shares information with ICE. Doing so will protect all students, including immigrant youth, from both the school to deportation and the school to prison pipeline. It is absolutely insane we're still fighting for people's right in this century. And the fact that people can stop this, but they decide to look the other way, puts students like my nieces in danger. It is a shame that BPS is working in collaboration with BRIC, another proof that the immigrant community cannot trust the BPS administration. This is a huge betrayal to the student and to the parents who send them every single day to get a better education for better opportunities. Just because a dumb mistake is made does not mean that a kid should be deported. We need to pass a strong privacy protection to make sure the police stop abusing technology against people of color and other vulnerable communities. Boston Police, these students are just individuals like your kids trying to get education and trying to figure things out in life. The only difference is that they can lose their stability, their family, everything, because BPS is sharing the information with BRIC. It sounds selfish and inhuman to me. Boston School Police and the Boston Police Department have been complicit in having youth incarcerated and deported for no reason other than being youth of color. Time and time again, the harm of civilians fall hardest on immigrant activists and people of color, the same community with health and safety Boston should be fighting to protect. The communities that have to live subject to surveillance technology should be the ones to decide whether they're necessary and what rules should be in place for them to use. The community should be in control, not a computer. We need community control over the police because, let's be honest, this is a great excuse to attack the immigrant community. The more inclusive and democratic the process, the stronger, safer, and healthy will be in our communities and our democratic process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Michelle.
Next up, we have Danya, and then Fior. If you're in the waiting room, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we're going to go to Simon and then Catherine.
Very good. Danya, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Danya Barroso. I'm 14 years old and I'm a leader of SIM. For a very long time now, the community has fought to get answers about why and how school police and the police department share private and student information. School police and the police department have caused harm and mistrust resulting from their lack of care for our people. We know that young people are being criminalized for normal teen behavior that I myself have experience with. Walking down the hallway after class and having the school police pull out kids of the school for just talking to their friends at the end of the school day. There was no transparency with students or families about what police are doing. As a teenager living through this, I need the surveillance oversight ordinance to be adopted now because I'm tired of having to worry that my friends and I are constantly in danger when we're just hanging out. Being a teenager is a struggle in itself, nonetheless having to worry about being safe from the police in our community. Are you supposed to be keeping us safe instead of endangering us, not being the cause of our anxiety, fear, and anger? Boston School Police and the Boston Police Department have been complicit in having youth incarcerated and deported for no reason other than being youth of color. We have seen this with our own eyes. Boston School Police are in constant communication with BRIC to the point where they share student files and information via email without notifying families. This is unacceptable. The fact that BPS wouldn't say this themselves shows a gross lack of transparency and accountability. I come from an immigrant family. I have seen my own parents in fear from the police. Now I am in fear. Next, it will be my children. If I don't do something about this now, enough is enough. This ordinance is for the community. Besides, it gives us a voice in the decision-making process that decides which surveillance technologies will be used, when, and how. The community should be in control, not a computer, a corporation that profits from surveillance, an executive agency working in secret, or anyone else. Thank you.
Okay, Michelle, who's up next?
Next is Catherine, and then Karina and Victor.
Very good. Catherine, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Catherine de Martinez, and I am a student at Boston International Newcomers Academy and a member at BSAC. I am here to offer my testimony on the student information sharing and surveillance technology to this committee. To be blunt, we know that these surveillance technologies are racist, disproportionately targeting people of color. We know that these technologies and the information they generate have been used to target and harass our students. And above all else, we know that the present policies surrounding surveillance technologies and information sharings are overly vague, following to protect our students. Current practices relating to sharing sensitive information with law enforcement, particularly federal immigration authorities, have severely damaged the trust between the district and our students. I don't think that this ordinance alone will fix this, but I do believe it's an important step. As an immigrant, I don't want to fear going to school every day. I don't want to tell my peers that they need to be careful or that they can't trust their own school district. This needs to stop. Because I do not go to school to face intimidation by our superiors or to be spied on. I go to school to learn. Thank you, everyone.
Next, we have Karina, and if Karina, you also have Victor with you, you both can go ahead. And then I see Simon is back, so I'll let him in as well.
Good. Welcome, Karina and Victor.
Hi, so it'll just be me. So hi, I'm Karina. I'm running as the field organizer for the student immigrant movement in support of the ordinance on surveillance oversight and information sharing presented by Councilors Wu and Arroyo and Council President Janey. This ordinance establishes oversight and accountability mechanisms over both current surveillance practices and future acquisitions of surveillance technologies in the city of Boston. The ordinance also sets rules that preserve students' privacy and prohibits unnecessary sharing of information between BPS, the BSP, BPD, and the federal agencies like ICE. We have seen a clear division and a lack of transparency from the institutions and systems that claim to protect the community. SIM and other partners have been working endlessly to pass a policy that would protect our most vulnerable students from criminalization within the school environment, not just in Boston, but over the country. We are seeing demands for more transparency and clear communication between law enforcement and the communities who are targeted and affected most by the policies or lack thereof. I'm here today to urge Boston to pass this ordinance if we want to see real structural changes that would protect BIPOC communities rather than continue to criminalize them. The harms of surveillance fall hardest on immigrants, activists, and people of color, the same communities whose health and safety Boston should be fighting to protect. I don't want to hear my 8-year-old nephew tell me about a police interaction that happened at school, but rather what activities and lesson plans he did that day. I don't want to hear about my brother's teachers telling their students about being careful of what color clothing and symbols they can and can't wear for their own safety on school grounds. The youth is highly targeted and criminalized. We need transparency and accountability for what surveillance tools can and cannot be used to break down the barriers that are in front of our young people on a daily basis. Boston must pass this ordinance and join Somerville, Cambridge, and Lawrence to not only protect privacy rights and civil liberties, but also provide tools so that people in Boston can hold public officials accountable. I also just like to add and highlight, like many of the panelists and the members have been saying, it's also not surprising that BPS and BPD is not here to have this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now Simon.
All right, cool. Sorry. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
All right, cool. Hi. So I'll make this quick. Everyone's already said a lot of beautiful things. So my name is Simon. I'm a member of the Boston Student Advisory Council and a senior at BLA. I'm here today to show my support for the ordinance and to have an immediate impact in BPS. First and foremost, this issue is a direct showing of what way the district and the city wants to go. We could take the repeated racist and white supremacist mindset that continues to hold minority students back while allowing for the continual advancement of white and affluent students, or we can switch it up for once and we can make an attempt to create a change in our system that we are currently living under and provide more safety, transparency, and community involvement. The options are actually quite simple, and like my fellow BSAT member said, Kamani said earlier, it's freaking November 2020. There's no way we should still be dealing over the same issues that have been happening for years and years and years. We need to have a more efficient system because this has been going on way too long in our city. There's no reason why we should continue supporting the school to prison pipeline in Boston. And inherently, by not passing things like this and being efficient in our actions, we are supporting the school to prison pipeline. So with that being said, without a change to our current surveillance system, that will end up being the outcome, and we need to make more progress in this district. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we're going to have Sabrina, and then Brandy, and then Christopher Lucy.
Welcome, Sabrina.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Hi, councilors. My name is Sabrina Barroso. I'm the lead organizer for the Student Movement. I'm here today to share my experiences as a young person and as an organizer. I'm 22 years old and I come from a mixed status family. My family and we've been personally impacted by law enforcement separating our family. And I know what it's like to be years without someone that you love. I know what it's like to live in fear because you don't want to lose someone in your family. And I know what it's like to be afraid to share your needs, your experiences out of fear that that information will be used against you. And so even as I am today, and the people that I work with, when I talk to the young people that I work with, when I see their faces and when we talk about our concerns, it's clear to me that they are concerned about the same problems that I am, and for a good reason. With my own eyes, I've seen reports that BPS has been apprehensive to share. They just recently shared with lawyers. These reports show nonchalant, informal exchanges over email of young people's information. Like my colleagues and my partners have shared, right, there's an extensive list to the different types of reports that they make where they are deliberately incriminating or criminalizing young people in their actions when there is no crime committed, when they're literally just existing outside in school or on the streets, right? And it's one of these things that it's a situation that has created so much damage and mistrust, as we've heard from other young people, to the point where it's been years. And we've had conversations with Casilius, the lawyers, the administration as a whole, central office, and they've told us to our face that this was over and done with, that it was a one-time situation. But now looking at these reports, we can see that there's been communication between Boston School Police and BRIC as of January 2020, when we were working with them, and they told us to our face that it had stopped. So this is a very serious problem, a very critical issue for us to work on. And to me, as a city, we have a responsibility to hold BPS accountable, to hold the police accountable, to hold BRIC accountable for jeopardizing the well-being of our young people in the city. And, you know, I really want to highlight the fact that this is, again, not just for undocumented students, this is for young people across the city and for families across the city. This surveillance ordinance is not just for schools. This will also help us readdress and reimagine the way that we are giving power, holding power in our communities. This is for everyone's well-being, not just for young people or students who are a part of BPS. And it's crucial that we pass this ordinance to join Cambridge, Somerville, Lawrence, to really uphold community control. So thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you, Sabrina.
And now we have Brandy.
Brandy, welcome.
Hello, thank you. My name is Brandy Henry, and I'm here today on behalf of the National Association of Social Workers Massachusetts chapter to speak in support of the ordinance on surveillance, oversight, and information sharing presented by Council President Janey and Councilors Wu and Arroyo. An ordinance providing accountability, transparency, and oversight regarding the use and acquisition of surveillance technologies and surveillance data collected by the City of Boston, its agencies, and its public officials is critically important to the City of Boston. This ordinance provides important protections to all students in Boston Public Schools and especially protects our undocumented students. Boston Public Schools must be a safe and welcoming place for all students, no matter their immigration status. Students shouldn't fear going to school will result in their information being shared with ICE. With this law, Boston will set a new course using a tried and tested framework based on inclusivity and community consent. Over a dozen cities nationwide, including 3 in Massachusetts, Cambridge, Somerville, and Lawrence, have already benefited from the transparency and accountability this type of ordinance brings. As social workers, we believe that the more inclusive and democratic the process, the stronger, safer, and healthier our communities will be. Our current policy and practice falls short to create a safe learning environment for our students. Current data shows that over 130 reports from Boston Public Schools have landed in ICE's hands due to insufficient protections at the city level. To protect our students, we need to limit the kinds of information Boston Public Schools share with the Boston Police Department, which then shares information with ICE. Doing so will protect undocumented students and many others from both the school to deportation and school to prison pipelines. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Brandy.
Next up, we have Christopher Lucy. Then we're going to go to Mo Lotman, then Matt Krieger.
Welcome, Christopher.
Christopher, you can unmute yourself.
Welcome, Christopher. Can you hear us?
Unmute. Oh, unmute. Okay. Did I unmute properly? You can hear me?
We can hear you, Christopher. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you. Assembled city councilors and assembled advocates today, as a descendant of immigrants, as a citizen of the country, as a resident of the city, and as a volunteer in a group called Restore the Fourth, I feel that it's imperative that we have a vigorous local oversight ordinance for surveillance technologies of all kinds, no matter whether we see them today or some that we may see in future. No matter how it is acquired, how it is used, or what type it is. And I'm not a complete abolitionist. I do believe that there are some valid uses for these technologies that might be beneficial to the public at large. I think that it is important that they be held accountable to our local elected officials and that they be in synchronous with our constitutional guarantees. And I believe that this is a much wider issue than just for those who are recent immigrants or those who are younger people in the public school system. This is an issue that all of us as citizens in this city and in the country, where we have multiple layers of laws, we have federal laws, we have state laws that also address these issues, that we need to and we should have a voice in this issue so that we can be represented on the most important, one of the most important issues, which is transparency, freedom, and our constitutional guarantees. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Now we're going to go to Mo Lotman. Mo, you can unmute yourself.
Mo, welcome.
How's that?
Sounds
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Thanks. My name is Mo Lotman. I'm also a volunteer with Restore the Fourth that live in Somerville, and I also publish a magazine called The Techno-Skeptic, which is intelligent technology criticism. I want to thank everyone on the council for bringing this surveillance ordinance up and this incredible support that it seems to have from almost everyone we've heard from. It's really encouraging. Basically, all I want to add is just that new technology just gives unprecedented power, and the power, it's not only unprecedented, but it's previously even unimaginable. And some of these powers, I just don't believe, honestly, anyone should be ever wielding. We've seen that the governments and corporations and law enforcement conduct mass surveillance. They've abused this power. They violated Fourth Amendment of just ordinary people going about their regular business, whether it's license plate readers, ubiquitous video cameras, facial recognitions, drones, warrantless eavesdropping. We see that if the technology is available, it will be used. And when a criminal statute is violated, the violator goes to prison or gets fined. But when the Fourth Amendment is violated, nothing happens and no one is punished because the courts usually refuse to find standing for the plaintiffs, and they want proof that some secondary harm has been committed. So we've seen this again and again, that the Fourth Amendment, our constitutional rights are violated and there's no consequences. And so unfortunately, it's come down to municipal governments and state governments to be on the front lines of protecting the civil liberties and actual constitutional rights of citizens. And so that's why it's so important for cities like Boston to take the lead and pass this kind of ordinance to put surveillance under civilian oversight. The only one other thing I want to add is just that Section 2 does have a bunch of exemptions for cameras, and I would like to at least put forward the idea that those exemptions should not be there, because cameras are also incredibly invasive, and the use of the data that's collected by cameras can later be used with various other technologies to create further harms. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Next, we're going to hear from Matt Krieger, and then after that, we'll hear from Elizabeth McIntyre and Elizabeth Badger.
Thank you.
You have the floor, Matt. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Councilor. Thank you, City Council, for holding this hearing. Matt Krieger, staff attorney from the Mental Health Legal Advisors Committee for the Supreme Judicial Court. We're here to offer our unwavering support for the Learn Without Fear policy, and to thank the councilors behind this, as well as, of course, the student immigrant movement and unafraid educators for their tireless efforts on this. And while a lot of the focus is properly on information that BPS and our law enforcement agents should not be sharing about students, I need to take a moment to flag all of the things that BPS and Boston Police Department should be sharing with our State Department of Education, but aren't, and much to our concern. So if you'll recall, in 2018, Massachusetts passed the Criminal Justice Reform Act to try to change the way that we approach not only addressing crime in our streets, but the way that our youth are policed in schools. And that law required Boston to make sure they were submitting to the State Department of Education data on school-based arrests, on referrals to law enforcement, and in exactly what police are doing in our schools. When that law went into effect, Boston reported only 4 school-based arrests. The State Department of Education, the Globe later uncovered 110 more from the exact same year. If we, at this moment, when our children aren't even in schools and we're at the edge of a real financial precipice here, given the pandemic, I think we really need to know not only why police are in our schools, but what exactly they're doing there. And as the council looks deeply at surveillance technology and information sharing, just urge continual concern to make sure that when it comes to things that BPS and BPD should actually be reporting, they make sure that data gets to the state and to the public where it belongs, so we can decide as a public whether it's right to have police with our school children in our school buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Elizabeth McIntyre.
Elizabeth, welcome.
Hi, good evening. My name is Elizabeth McIntyre, and I'm a senior staff attorney at Greater Boston Legal Services in our School to Prison Pipeline Intervention Project. So we represent young people of color with disabilities in school discipline and special education cases. And I'm here today to address Chapter 4 of this ordinance, which would govern the relationship between the Boston School Police, now called the Department of Safety Services, and the BPD. I do want to note at the outset that law enforcement officers make their schools less safe, not more safe, and that a true Department of Safety Services would focus on building anti-racist, trauma-sensitive schools, meaningful, well-funded restorative justice, and inclusionary special education programs. I was part of the working group that the district convened in order to develop the new information sharing policy that was passed by the school committee this past September. Unfortunately, that policy continues to give school police authority to criminalize students for developmentally typical behavior, and it is critical that this ordinance protect our young people where the district did not. Under this new policy, Boston School Police continue to create Boston Police Department records called 1-1s. These are law enforcement records that expose students to a variety of terrifying legal consequences. For example, I have represented a 12-year-old autistic boy who was running in circles in a school foyer, crying, say he wanted to call his mom. He pushed a chair in the foyer out of his path as he ran. The chair fell over and landed near a school police officer. A 9-year-old girl with PTSD who became anxious because she thought a classmate was staring at her. She refused to get on the bus with that classmate, and when a bus monitor tried to take her hand to pull her onto the bus, she slapped the bus monitor's hand away and ran back into school. And a 14-year-old who elbowed a classmate out of the way when the classmate leaned on his locker and prevented him from being able to open it. The district's policy right now continues to allow the creation of BPD reports and the harm that follows them in each of those cases. The district's policy allows 1-1s to be written up even for simple assault, which does not even require physical contact, among other misdemeanors that do not involve weapons or even violence. Training will not solve this problem. If the district agrees that we should not criminalize students for developmentally typical conduct or conduct related to their disabilities, let's write that into law. It is critical that the council adopt the much narrower language proposed in Chapter 4 of this ordinance. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Elizabeth Badger.
Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Badger. I am a senior attorney at the PAIR Project, which is a legal services organization that serves non-citizens in Massachusetts. I've testified before the city council before about the devastating impact that information sharing has had on my young immigrant clients. I'd like to take the opportunity tonight to talk about certain aspects of the ordinance that I believe are important to protecting immigrant students in light of what Councilor Arroyo referenced, the several thousand pages of documents produced by BPS last week pursuant to a records request. I also think I can address some of the frequent justifications for surveillance that the administration often promotes, given that they aren't here. Overall, the records that we've seen from BPS, they demonstrate, I would say, a specific intent in our policing and in our immigration system, and what's now overflowed to our school system to criminalize Black and Brown students through an unchecked flow of allegations that are often unsupported or allege no criminal conduct at all. There are several email exchanges directly between ICE officials and BPS safety services officers of the nature, do you have any information on a particular individual? The safety services officer may respond with information or says, no, not yet. I'll keep watching him, demonstrating an intent to troll students for derogatory information that can then be passed to ICE. So if we're going to keep officers in the schools, we need to return them to a role of supporting, not criminalizing students, but not once in the records, the several hundred pages that I've read so far, has there been any mention by a BPS employee or anyone for that matter of, let me try to give this young person some resources. before we deport him. We frequently hear the justification of the need to protect victims as a justification for surveillance. Not one time in the several hundred pages that I've read do I see information sharing for the purpose of protecting someone else. Our city needs to acknowledge that our schools have become a center for policing and take responsibility and create an ordinance that guarantees that information sharing will be limited to instances where safety and not criminalization is truly the utmost concern, which is what Section 5 of the ordinance does. I also want to point out that in March of 2018, the BPS Safety Services, the former head of BPS Safety Services, issued a policy limiting information sharing by safety services officers, which from the records seemed to have no appreciable impact whatsoever on the information sharing habits of BPS. And that's why we need the training, the oversight, and the enforcement provisions that the ordinance provides. And that's specifically something that the August 2020 BPS policy lacks. And just lastly, I want to stress the importance of the notice provisions in Section 5, also something that the BPS policy lacks for students and families. It took 3 years and many, many lawyers to get to the point where BPS produced public records regarding the information that they were sharing with ICE and BPD, which sadly demonstrated what I think many of us had long suspected. But in those 3 years, many students were detained and deported. And part of the difficulty of proving what has been happening is that there was no notice ever to impacted families, and families couldn't get records on their own. So not only is Section 5 important for facilitating families' rights to get their records, but it plays a role in the enforcement of this policy. And I was also part of the many months where we were very patient working with BPS on their policy. And I frankly have to say that, unless they're going to come here and say, we're going to take police out of schools, there's not much that they can say that we haven't already addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Michelle, how many more folks have signed up to testify? And then I also know that we have a video presentation as well. So just kind of give me a sense.
Yeah, we have about 11 more people.
11 to give public testimony, and then we have the video.
Yes.
All right, so I'm thinking we may want to shift to the video. So let me give that some thought. So for those that are still yet to testify, given we have a hard stop at 6 o'clock, if we could either condense the public testimony into say like a minute and a half, or we could go to the video and then whatever remaining time we have. So let's see, we'll take a couple more and let's see if we can get folks to condense, and if we can and we can get everything in. Otherwise, I'll shift to do the video and then come back to public testimony. And for my colleagues that are still on, if they have any additional parting comments, let me know by show of hands, I guess, so we can get the public testimony in before we go back to the colleagues. Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah. So next up we have Maddie Cropley, and then Mary Claire Flores, and then Max Kennedy.
Good afternoon, counselors, and good afternoon, advocates. A big shout out to everybody on the panel. Thank you for all the work you do with young people. My name is Maddie Cropley. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a union member and a librarian that works with teens, and I live in Roxbury, and I'm here to support this ordinance. I work as a teen librarian in a couple neighborhoods in Boston, and previously at the big library up on Copley Square. I've heard stories from teens time and again about how much scrutiny they're subjected to in school buildings and out in public. On outreach visits to schools, I've had teens tell me they don't want to come into the library because there are surveillance cameras when I invite them to come into different library programs. I know this ordinance isn't going to remove cameras, but these concerns of theirs point to the larger effects of surveillance on teens, whether it's technological or administrative surveillance, that for many teens, public buildings and institutions are a place of scrutiny, punishment, and control. They can see it, they can feel it, and some of them are in this public hearing telling us that. Other advocates here today can speak better than I ever could about how Boston Public Schools share students' information, which ends up in the hands of federal authorities, resulting in terrible consequences for the young people involved. Contact with police for what is essentially normal teen behavior has long-lasting and irrevocable effects on the future outcomes for young people, especially Black teens and teens of color. It's been shown time and again that once a person's young person's name is entered into a police form or a database, they are more likely to have subsequent encounters with police, and that they are more likely to avoid institutions like hospitals, libraries, schools, banks, and places of employment for fear of being surveilled or identified by police or other authorities. I support this ordinance because it gives the people of the city of Boston and the students and the young people a voice by building accountability measures and community oversight of the sharing of student information with police. As others have stated here today, school policy on sharing student information must recognize the dignity and vulnerability of Black, brown, and immigrant youth. We cannot continue to let our schools be a part of the pipeline to deportation or prison. Students should not have to fear going to school or anywhere else in public for that matter. Thank you, counselors, and thank you again to all the other advocates as well. Thank you.
I don't see Mary Claire anymore, so we're going to go to Max Kennedy.
Hi, my name is Max Kennedy, and I'm a math teacher at Margarita Munoz Academy in the Boston Public Schools. I'm here today to urge City Council to pass the Surveillance Oversight Ordinance. As a teacher, I was deeply troubled this year to learn of the extent of BPS's sharing of student information with federal law enforcement. And I was particularly disturbed to learn that incident reports describing what should have been routine school disciplinary matters have been shared with federal immigration enforcement. When I read about the kinds of situations that have been described in these incident reports, like disturbing a school assembly, my thoughts go immediately to my own students. As teachers, we understand the difference between a routine school disciplinary matter and a criminal one. And I think about the many disturbances I've de-escalated over the years and followed up with appropriate school-based consequences. What if a school resource officer had intervened or witnessed the incident and written up a report? Not knowing my students like I do, would they have interpreted the behavior as criminal and sent the report to the police department? Could my most vulnerable students, those who are undocumented, have had their safety and security threatened by the very people meant to protect them? This inappropriate and dangerous sharing of student information with federal agencies is entirely due to our school district's failure to provide clear and authoritative guidance on what kinds of incident reports may be submitted to the Boston Police Department. Under significant pressure from a coalition of students and teachers, the district has passed a policy that they claim would remedy the situation. Unfortunately, their new policy remains woefully insufficient to address the problem. The new policy still allows school police to submit incident reports to the Boston Police Department, and the district has failed to put in place meaningful oversight regarding the nature of these reports or who BPD shares these reports with. It is absolutely imperative that City Council passes ordinance, which contains the Learn Without Fear policy for which Boston Teachers Union has been advocating. We need a policy that makes it absolutely clear and explicit what types of incidents may be written up by school resource officers, prohibits student information from being shared with BPD and federal law enforcement, and lays out a strong and clear system of independent oversight to ensure that these definitions are not left up to the interpretation of individual officers. Young people in Boston deserve a clear commitment from us that we are here to protect them. By passing this ordinance, you can show students and families in our city that nothing is more important to us than their safety, and we will not leave loopholes when it comes to protecting them.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Shakia Scott, and then Lena Papagiannis, and then Amy Vanderheel. Shakia, you have the floor.
Thank you. 1 second. Here I am. I hope everyone can see me. Good afternoon. My name is Shakia Scott, and today I'm providing testimony on behalf of Restore the Fourth Boston's chapter, or Digital Fourth. Of course, we want to thank the council and those who have co-sponsored this important measure, including our allies at the ACLU of Massachusetts, the Student Immigrant Movement, the Unafraid Educators, and the Muslim Justice League, of course, for your great work and testimony here today, and advocacy for this draft. As a quick background, Restore the Fourth, or RT4 Boston, is the local chapter of an all-volunteer civil liberties organization, Restore the Fourth, which was formed in 2012, and we oppose unconstitutional government surveillance and protect the privacy of residents of Greater Boston and across the nation. And while we believe that this ordinance is generally well drafted and deserves City Councilors' support, as we heard here today, we all support this measure and passage of it. We have provided some amendments to improve the ordinance in ways that we think make it unambiguous, effective, and future-proof. So we provided written testimony with detailed comments, which you can find on pages 2 with our comments, and then detailed comments on pages 3 through 6 in your packets, I believe. But just to summarize really quickly, in sections 2.1.1 and 2.1.2, exempting from the definition of surveillance data which has been provided in exchange for city services, created profound problems where those city services are vital, such as police services or services from Boston Public Schools. Provisions in 2.3 and 2.4 on exigent circumstances and redactions leave too much to the discretion of the police commissioner and the mayor. In section 4.2.3, the 90-day limit for city council review of surveillance technology, we suggest should be lengthened to at least 120 days. In section 4.2.11 or 11, the surveillance technology impact reports should include not only the cost of technology to the city budget, but the overall cost of the technology. And there are some detailed comments breaking down what that means there. Provisions in 7.2 on suppression need to be broadened. And then the language in 7.3 on enforcement should include a specific dollar amount a person can recover from a violating party and provisions for awarding attorneys' fees. So those are some of our amendments. And again, we provided written testimony, so I won't take too much more time. Just quickly, those are on page 2 with detailed comments on pages 3 through 6. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Next up, we have Lena.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lena Papayanis. I'm a BPS teacher. I've been involved in this work since the issues first came to light in 2017. So other folks have already explained what's missing in the BPS policy and how this ordinance fills the gaps on the school issue. What I'm hoping to offer here is some evidence as to why we cannot trust that the officers will follow the BPS policy as it stands and why the stronger language from the ordinance is what's needed. So just a few days ago, and other folks have mentioned this, the lawyers who filed a lawsuit against BPS received thousands of pages of emails that prove strong ties between Boston School Police, and I'll be saying BSP, the BPD, BRIC, and ICE. These emails are not under protective order. So I want to share some of those emails with you today with the names fully redacted, because the specific language in the emails actually helps us to understand what we're dealing with here and why the strong limits and strong oversight are necessary. And because I really appreciate what President Janey said earlier, that these conversations, including the evidence substantiating them, need to be had in a public forum. So one email from a school police officer to brick@pd.boston.gov has a subject line identification, and this is the email. Good afternoon, my name is Officer Blank with the BSP assigned to the blank K-8 school. Received an email this morning from the BRIC. There is a photo of 4 blank standing on a set of stairs in front of a house. The individual with blank is blank, who was a student at my school. Please give me a call on my cell if you need more information. Thank you. The officer, the school police officer, then sends a profile of a student, but the profile that he sends is from another school, not his school. So then a while later, he writes again and says, my apologies, disregard the first sheet I sent. This is the correct information. And he sends the second profile of a student, right? Nothing has happened here. He's identifying a student in a picture off school property. Second email from the BRIC to a Boston police officer, school police officer, I'm sorry, BSP. Do you have a blank that attends blank, meaning your school? The BSP officer responds, quote, okay, bro, I am checking now and I will let you know. The BRIC then sends a photo to help the officer identify. And the BSP officer then sends a profile of a student back to the BRIC. The BRIC person then forwards that to an @ice.dhs.gov address asking, this your guy? ? Email number 3, there's only 2 more. From the BRIC to 3 ICE agents with the subject line, school police incident. This email includes an incident report written by school police, and it has the following commentary from the BRIC to the ICE people. Quote, note the school police report lists both, meaning both individuals in the report, students, as self-admitting gang membership. This is gang verification gold, end quote. Email number 4 from the BSP officer to the BRIC. Hey, does anyone have anything on this individual? He was walking with blank during lunch. The student was wearing white and blue rosary beads, blue jacket, and a blue hat. We will keep an eye out for him. His attendance is horrible. The BRIC person responds with, he's not in any incidents so far. Last email. This is from ICE. ICE says, do you guys know this subject? The BSP officer, school police officer, responds with, yes, sir. He's a student at blank. We don't have anything on him yet. Still watching him. This kid has the same address as blank. ICE responds, any suspicion of MS or 18th Street, referencing gangs in Boston? BRIC responds, I can't find him in any BPD records, but as blank, meaning the BSP officer, said, there's the same address as blank. Okay, so very quickly, what do these email chains tell us? And there's hundreds of these, hundreds and hundreds, right? But we can't read them all. Free flow of information confirmed what everyone thought all along. Through incident reports, yes, but also through emails and through phone. There's some very personal, chummy emails, right? There's a great deal of comfort here. There's also a general BRIC listserv that is used. That's also really troubling. Immigration cases are being fortified using BSP files on students, not just incident reports. We also see that this was a K-8 school that was referenced in one of the emails, and not just one. Middle schoolers are being pursued by the BRIC, middle schoolers. There is also important to note here that there's some kind of database that BSP is operating and using from which they are drawing information about students to then share with other law enforcement, to the point where they have access clearly to individual students at other schools, not the school that they're currently at. The last little point here that's really important, it's not so little, is that school police accusations of gang membership are actively being used in the BPD's 10-point system. That was the line about the gang verification gold, meaning that the fact that a school police officer said that this person was a self-admitting gang member, that gets that child 8 points in the 10-point system. So 80% of the way there to being confirmed by the BPD as a gang member. So the takeaway, if nothing else, is that these emails show that Boston school police officers are part of law enforcement apparatus of the city and of the federal government, both in their self-imagination and also in the existing structures of city government. This means that we can't trust them to follow the policy, any policy that serves to limit these relationships. We can't just say that, okay, they'll do it on their own. The district policy does not do enough to actually oversee that communication between BSP and the BPD and ICE and the BRIC will actually be above board. We can't actually check it because the incident reports, these 1.1s, go directly into BPD hands, and then we don't get to see them. So it also does not do enough, the BPS policy, to limit what can actually be said in that communication. So they'd still be able to say, for example, that somebody was a confirmed gang member. We don't want that to happen. So this ordinance is absolutely needed to address these concerns. I just want to end with this one thing, that when we read these things and we see this guy, is this your guy? And this subject, we're talking about people's children. We're talking about my students. These are our kids in our city. Let's stand up for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy, you have the floor, and then we're going to go to Rebecca Mulligan, and then Emily Leung.
Thank you very much. Thank you, counselors. My name is Amy Vanderhill. I live in Rosendale, and I'm here as a citizen who cares about this issue. And I'm here to support this ordinance because it establishes oversight and accountability mechanisms over the current surveillance practices and the acquisition of future surveillance technologies. It also sets up rules to preserve student privacy and prohibit unnecessary information sharing between the agencies, as we've heard. For too long in this country, we've largely accepted that police departments and agencies will be funded to buy weapons and surveillance equipment, but this is at the expense of what our communities need. This must stop now. I work as support staff at MIT in the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. The policy in the building in which I work is that we don't use video surveillance cameras, even though there's always the potential for equipment theft or other safety issues. The community has decided against surveillance because we feel students, staff, and the faculty, their civil rights are more important than property. It's vital that everyone in our city be able to do their work, to interact in their community, to move about freely without being subject to collection of data, profiling, surveillance, and loss of privacy. Police departments and agencies have unprecedented power over our communities, and advances in technologies will only increase this imbalance. In order to ensure that we have a fair, just, and effective system, we must have mechanisms of accountability. Time and again, the harms of surveillance fall hardest on immigrants, activists, and people of color. These are the same communities whose health and safety Boston should be fighting to protect. This ordinance serves those communities and all communities by giving residents a voice in the decision-making process that decides which surveillance technologies will be used, when, and how. The City of Boston has no current mechanism by which residents can have a voice regarding the surveillance equipment that's used to control and police them. This ordinance before the council provides this critical institutional reform. Boston must pass this ordinance to bring transparency, accountability, and oversight to surveillance in the interest of defending racial justice, privacy, rights, and civil liberties. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Rebecca Mulligan, then Emily Leung, then Nicole Elliott.
Hi, thank you. Good evening. My name is Rebecca Mulligan. I'm a Boston resident, member of the BTU Unafraid Educators, and an English teacher at Boston International Newcomers Academy, or BINCA. I'm also deeply concerned that BPS is currently sharing so much student information with Boston Police and in turn ICE and other law enforcement. I'm speaking with you today because Black Lives Matter, Immigrant Lives Matter, and Black Immigrant Lives Matter. Our Boston City officials, from the mayor to members of the City Council, regularly visit BINCA to share words of inspiration and encouragement to our immigrant students. Like many other decision makers of the city, you tell our students that you welcome and value them. I hope you will stand by your words and put them into action by passing this ordinance that includes a clear, strict, accountable policy for BPS collaboration with law enforcement. If you work to stop write-ups from making their way to law enforcement, then the generous words you share with my students will ring true. Otherwise, they fall devastatingly and dangerously flat. We cannot honestly celebrate and encourage our students while quietly handing their information over to law enforcement. We cannot tell them that we welcome them into our school while we are contributing to the possibility that they will be violently removed or otherwise incarcerated. Black, Indigenous, POC people are already incarcerated unjustly and disproportionately. Students should not come to school wondering if their behavior in school could lead to such a fate for themselves. They know that this happens, and they know it happens in Boston. The policy passed by the Boston School Committee is not strong enough. The categories of incidents that allow for student information to be reported and shared with law enforcement are still too broad. We need a policy that makes it clear to students that they will be safe in our schools, a policy that is clearly articulated, stringent, and executed with transparency. Because the school district did not deliver on this, it's important to pass this ordinance that includes the policy written by SIM and BTU's Unafraid Educators. This will ensure that the certain steps we take to secure students' safety do not in turn endanger them even more. We need this policy now in order to know that students' information will not be shared with law enforcement. I thank you for your time and ask you to act today in the name of safe and just schools. I ask you to vote in favor of this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Emily, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good evening to everyone. Thank you to the counselors and the sponsors and all the amazing organizers and support. My name is Emily Leung. I'm a supervising immigration attorney at the Justice Center of Southeast Massachusetts. I've previously testified before the City Council on issues related to the BRIC and gang database, and my organization is party to the lawsuit led by the ACLU that is looking to get more transparency around the BRIC gang database and information sharing that's happening between BPS. There are multiple lawsuits, of course, but party to one of them. There's been so much wonderful testimony today, and it is very late in the day, so I just want to lend my support and be another member of the chorus that is supporting this ordinance. And also, I can confirm from my perspective as an immigration attorney that I have also witnessed the direct impacts of these information sharing policies and surveillance efforts on communities of color, and from my experience, particularly on immigrant communities of color and immigrant youth. I think that the policies that are being promoted in this ordinance are very common sense. And I would just like to share that in the early days after the Trump administration came into power, many local state agencies, as well as social services agencies, reached out to ask me for presentations and for information about how they could better protect the immigrant communities that they served. And a lot of things that are suggested in this policy in terms of not recording information that is not related to the work that they're doing. I talked to health centers, I talked to DTA, to all these different agencies. And the policies that are being promoted in this ordinance mirror the kind of advice that I gave to those agencies in that time. And we are still in that time of increased enforcement and a very hostile climate towards immigrants. And so it's really critical that these steps be taken. And again, these are common sense steps, and they're things that other agencies have reached out that they wanted to proactively do. And I think it's important that BPS should also want to do them. But if this ordinance is required, which I think has been shared by many individuals in order to make that happen, then it's really important that it be supported. The only other thing that I want to highlight, because I think there's been so much wonderful testimony, is that look at the amount of effort and work that has gone on to highlight this one small piece of information sharing that has had a devastating impact on communities. And so I do think the overall ordinance, even though I'm not very well versed in sort of larger surveillance and other information sharing situations, it's really important that there is public discourse and oversight and transparency, because with so many people behind this effort, we're still, as everyone shared, multiple years into trying to create something that is protective and supportive of the community. So I just wanted to add that very little piece to this this afternoon of very strong testimony, and again, lend my support to the ordinance and urge the council to adopt the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Nicole, and I believe Nicole is our last live sign up. If I missed anyone, please raise your blue hand. And otherwise, Mr. Vice Chair, after Nicole, I believe we're ready to go to the video.
Very good. And then after Nicole, we'll give the lead sponsor and all my colleagues just a moment if they want to give a final comment, and then we'll shift to the video, in which case we'll adjourn immediately after the video.
Thank you, City Councilors. My name is Nicole Elliott. I'm an educator in Roxbury, and I'm a member of the BTU. For many years, there's been an ongoing discussion and debate regarding the role of the police in our community. While I believe that police play an important role, I also know that there has been harm and mistrust from the actions of the police. Boston School Police has played a role in reporting and sharing information with the Boston Police Department, which leads to the criminalization of our youth for what is typical teenage behavior. We need the surveillance oversight ordinance to be adopted now because we need to stop the criminalization of our youth, particularly our Black and Brown youth, and stop the school to prison pipeline. I'm an educator in the Sheltered English Immersion strand in BPS. My students are immigrants or children of immigrants. We need this ordinance to be adopted now to keep our schools safe for my students and their families. One of the most crucial elements of student success is family engagement. In order to engage families in our families need to trust the schools. Our schools need to be a safe place where families can trust that information that will be harmful to them and may result in legal consequences will not be shared. I was on a teacher website recently where a privileged teacher was railing about how we don't need post-election resources for our students because they don't pay attention to it. That is not true for my students. My students don't live in that privileged position. They know what it means or could mean to them if certain people are elected or policies passed. Speaking of elections, this week we celebrated and continue to fight for our democratic institutions. The ordinance gives residents a voice in the decision-making process. The voice of the communities affected by surveillance need to have a voice in the decision-making. This is the democratic way. Please support the surveillance oversight ordinance to ensure the safety and success of our students and communities. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we do have one person who signed back on, and
Very
then
good.
she'll be the last.
And who is that?
This is Miss Mitter-Burke. I'm letting you in now.
Minna Burke, welcome, and you have the floor to give some comments.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. You have the floor.
Okay, great, thank you. I'll be quick. My name is Amelia Mitter-Burke. I live in Jamaica Plain, and I teach first grade SEI to English language learners in the Boston Public Schools in Roxbury. So thank you especially to Councilor Janie, Arroyo, and Wu for putting forward this very important ordinance. I'm here to speak strongly in support. All of my students are immigrants or come from families that have immigrated to Boston recently. And it is hard to overstate the challenges that immigrant students and their families face to be seen and heard and have their needs met by the school system. This is exactly the kind of proactive policy that we need to pass in order to ensure that all children can learn in our schools. So the threat of surveillance, of policing and immigration detention or deportation are very real terrors for my students, even though they are 6 years old, that absolutely interfere with their ability to learn, let alone the terror that has happened to some of our students, our children in our city, because of information sharing, from criminalization to deportation. And so as a teacher, what I'm here to say is this is the kind of policy I need to be able to do my job. No matter how well planned or executed my lessons are, I cannot do my job if my students and my families face this kind of mistrust and fear and potential real danger. So I know the city and the school district is very committed right now to more talk about equity and about racial justice. And I just want to put forth that this is exactly what we need to pass in order to really make that commitment real. And especially this week of all weeks, I think we can deeply appreciate how important the increased transparency and democratic oversight this would bring. As we're celebrating this American democracy this week, I think we need more input and more transparency in our policies. And as a teacher in Boston Public Schools, I need this kind of forward-thinking policy that shows our immigrant students and our families that we see them and they are safe and they are welcome, and we will do everything it takes for them to be able to just focus on learning how to be a person, how to be a reader and a thinker in the classroom. So thank you for your time, and thank you for putting forth this policy.
Thank you very much. And that will conclude, obviously, the signed in and in person or on video testimony. Do any of my colleagues, I see lead sponsor, Council President Kim Janey still on. Do you want to give a final comment before we turn it over to the video and we close out docket 0684? If you do, you have the floor, Council President.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vice Chair. Just briefly, I want to thank everyone who has stayed on. I know the hour is late, so I want to thank folks for their testimony. There's a lot of feedback. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Certainly want to thank the panelists again. I'm filled with a lot of emotion. On the one hand, I'm really angry about some of the real cases that were shared in terms of emails. We know that this wouldn't happen anywhere else if the student body looked different. And it's shameful. But I'm also very encouraged. My heart is very full. Just hearing the advocacy of the many folks on this Zoom call today. I'm really also encouraged by the suggested language. And so I'm anxious to kind of get into that suggested language during our next session on this, which is the working session, which we hope to schedule very, very soon. So thank you all for your advocacy on this issue. And many thanks to the organizations who have been leading the way, including ACLU, Mass, Unafraid Educators, and of course, SEM. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Very good. Thank you, Council President. And does our colleague, Councilor Kenzie Barker, I know she's still on. Does she have any final comments? If not, we'll go right to the video.
Just, Mr. Chair, to strongly thank everyone for sharing their public testimony today. I was really glad to hear it. And I do think that as frustrated as we are by this not being a two-way conversation with the administration, we'll be bringing everything that folks brought today into that next working session. So looking forward to that. And I just really want to thank the Council President for her leadership on this and all my colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Barker. Obviously, thanks to the chair, thanks to the lead sponsors, thanks to my colleagues for attending, participating, thanks for the panelists, and thank you to all those that offered public testimony, including the video, which will run, which will include, I believe it's somewhere in the vicinity, maybe 13 to 15 folks offering a video testimony, somewhere in the vicinity of a minute and a half to 2 minutes each. So this video will probably be somewhere between 26 and 30 minutes in length. And at which point, at the immediately concluding the video, docket 0684, which is the docket that we're discussing right now. It's a hearing regarding an ordinance on surveillance, oversight, and information sharing will be adjourned, and plans to obviously talk to the chair about a working session. So with that, I appreciate everyone's participation. Thank you to Michelle and Candace, and you can roll the video. And as mentioned, at the conclusion of the video, there will be no additional testimony. The meeting will immediately conclude in docket 0684, and the Committee on Government Operations will be adjourned. Thank you, Michelle and Candace, and roll the film.
City Councilors, my name is Katie Martinez Salvatierra. I support the values and views of SIM, and I am a member. Thank you for having me here today. It has been many years since our communities have been able to stand as one and fight against our oppressors as we have in the past. Lately, we have been able to stand up for ourselves and other people of color, but we are still overlooked. Many people have been living under a false sense of peace as their privilege has allowed them to brush off the problems in our society that affect us and everyone else. Normal people like the ones here today have had to fight for their lives and their rights as human beings, and I hope that in the future we won't have to. The people who are supposed to be protecting us throughout the day are misusing their authority to target the youth of our communities. It is seen all around us that the youth is being mistreated and misjudged by higher authority, and while our strengths are being undermined, our weak points and flaws are being showcased and exaggerated. Police brutality and overuse of power is just beginning to be brought into the eyes of the public, but it has gone on for too long. Children and teenagers are being labeled as criminals and delinquents and are burdened with these labels forever, and it is all because we are viewed as less by authority figures. We need community control over the police because so many police officers overuse their positions of power in order to be able to control everything around them. Our communities are invested with prying eyes, just searching for a reason to write us up. Knowing that the police would be able to purchase drones in order to surveil us without our consent disturbs me to a whole other level. With normal police cars, at least we can see it coming, but with drones, it's like we're being watched from the shadows. We can no longer walk the streets or even the hallways at school in peace as we live in fear of the future solely because of the color of our skin. We need to feel safe in our everyday lives. The harshness by which we are being treated has to stop before more are affected. Thank you. Katie Martinez Salvatierra.
For years, many people have been trying to get answers to important questions about the role of police in the community. There has even been a lot of harm and mistrust resulting from the actions of police. There is even proof that because of Boston School Police playing a role in reporting and sharing information, serving as an easy access link between schools and law enforcement, young people are being criminalized for normal teenage behavior. We have seen the lack of transparency even in knowing how the police operate. We need the surveillance oversight ordinance to be adopted now because this is something a normal person can't fix on their own. I have bore witness to the many people being subjected to the police's neglect and racist natures. I want communities and the people around me to feel safe and at ease. School should be a place where people can express themselves and make new connections without fear. We need community control over the police because many people have already lost trust in the police for valid reasons. Boston School Police and Boston Police Department have been complicit in having youth incarcerated and deported for no reason. Time and time again, the harms of surveillance fall hardest on immigrants, activists, and other minorities, the same communities they should be fighting to protect. This ordinance serves those communities and all communities by giving residents a voice in the decision-making process that decides which surveillance technology will be used, when, and how. These communities should be the one to decide whether surveillance is necessary and what rules should be put in place for their use, because they're the ones being surveilled. The community should be in control, not a computer or corporation that profits from surveillance or anybody else.
Dear City Councilors, my name is Sabrina, and for many years now, there have been many questions and concerns raised over the role the police plays in the community. As of now, there have been many incidences in regards to the police that has inflicted harm onto the people that has led to the distrust that has now amassed. Right now, we need community control over the police because there is a lack of transparency in how the police works and operates. We need to adopt the surveillance oversight ordinance right now because when the Boston police acts as a link between the school and law enforcement, young people end up criminalized for normal teenage behavior. And this mainly ends up affecting people of color. And regardless of your race and skin color, everyone has the right to feel safe. Therefore, I ask of you to please make haste.
City councilors, for years, young people, families, community organizers, educators, and lawyers have been constantly trying to get answers to important questions about the role of the police in the community. There's been a lot of harm and mistrust resulting from the actions of the police, and this mistrust is directly a result of the Boston School Police's role in reporting and sharing information, which is serving as an easy access link between the schools and law enforcement. This is only promoting the criminalization of teens who are simply partaking in normal everyday teenage behavior, which is now seen as quote-unquote thug behavior. We have seen the lack of transparency in the system, even knowing how the police operate, and this is exactly why we need the surveillance oversight ordinance to be adopted now. Everything that's happening is only normalizing and encouraging racial profiling to occur even more than it already has. I have been witness to many people in my life that I know that are constantly at unrest by the information or even lack of information of a police database. They worry about their families and their futures. Even I worry about my family and my future. My vision is for schools and my community to be a safe environment and a comfortable space for everyone, regardless of their status and their identities. School is a place to learn, not a place to fret and worry. It's a place to think about your future, not your lack of one. We need community control over the police now because many people have already lost their trust in the police. And what the police are doing in this case is only proving the fears of the people right. Boston School Police and the Boston Police Department have been complicit in having the youth incarcerated and deported for absolutely no reason other than being youth of color. Time and time again, this is harming only the immigrants, activists, and people of color, the same communities whose health and safety Boston should be fighting to protect. This ordinance serves those communities and all communities by giving residents a voice in the decision-making process that decides which surveillance technologies will be used, when and how. The communities that are being used and constantly have to live subject to surveillance technologies should be the ones to decide whether or not they are necessary and what rules should be in place for their use. The community should be in control, not a computer, a corporation that profits from surveillance, an executive agency working in secret, or anyone else. Thank you.
Dear City Councilors, my name is Natasha Jimenez. I'm writing on behalf of the student immigrant movement in support of the ordinance on the surveillance oversight and information sharing presented by Council President Janey and Councilors Wu and Ario. And this ordinance establishes oversight and accountability mechanisms over current surveillance practices and future acquisitions of surveillance technologies in the city of Boston. The ordinance also sets rules that preserve students' privacy and prohibits unnecessary information sharing between Boston Public Schools, Boston School Police, and Boston Police Department, and federal agencies like ICE. The city of Boston does not have any current mechanism by which residents can have a voice regarding the surveillance equipment that is used to control and that police them. The ordinance before the City Council provides this crucial institutional reform. First, an ordinance providing accountability, transparency, and oversight regarding the use and equation of surveillance technologies and surveillance data collected by the City of Boston, its agencies, and its public officials is critically important in the City of Boston. Unfortunately, the communities that have to live subject to surveillance technologies should be the ones that decide whether it's necessary and what rules should be in place for their use. The community should be in control, not a computer, a corporation that profits from surveillance, and an executive agency working in secret, or anyone else. Second, this ordinance provides important protections to all students in Boston Public Schools, especially protects our immigrant students. Boston Public Schools must be a safe and welcoming place for all our students, no matter their immigration status. As students in BPS, I don't want to go to school in fear. To protect our students, we need to limit the kinds of information Boston Public Schools and Boston School Police share with the Boston Police Department, which then share information with ICE. Doing so will protect immigrant students and everyone else from both school to deportation and the school to prison pipelines. With this law, Boston will set new course using tried and tested frameworks based on inclusivity and committed consent. Thank you.
Good evening, City Councilors. My name is Melanie, and I'm a SIM member. We are in the midst of a 21st century civil rights movement, demanding an end to institutionalized racism and white supremacy in policing. For too long, we have largely accepted that the police department and agencies will be funded to buy weapons and surveillance equipment at the expense of what our community really needs. And for decades, that has been the case, but this must stop now. My vision for our communities is to have a safe environment for future generations and this present one too. This generation doesn't want future generations to go to school with a fear. Heck, I don't want to go to school knowing that I might get watched or even have to be terrified of others knowing about my private information. I might be young, but I need my privacy, and others too. Who wouldn't like to have their privacy and for that to be stripped away? Imagine being watched when you're trying to take out the trash, or imagine going back to school, or having your child go to school, having the fear of their private information known between people they don't know. Time and again, the harms of surveillance fall hardest on immigrants, activists, and people of color. The same communities whose health and safety Boston should be fighting to protect. This ordinance serves those communities and all communities by giving residents a voice in the decision making. Did you know that the Boston Police and the police department have been complicit in having youth incarcerated and deported for no reason other than being a youth of color? Currently, police practice and fail to create a safe learning environment for our students. Current data shows that over 130 reports from Boston Public Schools have landed in ICE's hands due to inefficient protections at the city level. We cannot wait until another student is deported to take decisive action to protect our youth. Thank you.
Counselors. I imagine schools in my community to be a safe environment where everyone should be able to do things without needing to be watched 24/7. But this isn't the case, sadly. The police have been watching without our permission, as well as hurting our community members for years. An example of this would be police buying drones and surveilling people without their consent. But I don't just want to talk about other communities. I want to talk about mine. I live in a neighborhood with mostly minorities and have noticed that there are way more police cars where I live than in other neighborhoods. I walk home off the bus every day with one of my friends, and several times he has told me he has been stopped by the police just for walking. Instead of feeling safe when police are around, I feel scared. One wrong move and I could be a goner. Is this what police are trying to do? Use fear as a weapon? They say people in my neighborhood are dangerous when the only ones who have weapons are the police. And yes, kids do make stupid mistakes, but that gives you no right to call them part of a gang or a criminal. Teenagers should be free to express themselves, but that worry of police taking anything they do the wrong way, we stay silent instead. That constant feeling of knowing someone is looking behind your shoulder is just terrifying. We can't do anything without thinking of the consequences. I've even stopped hanging out with my friends outside because police might think that we're doing something suspicious. Think of what outcome you want. A community that is terrified of the police, or a community that feels safe. This is outrageous and has been going on for far too long. It needs to change, and this is one step in the right direction of community control.
City councilors. For years, young people, families, community organizations, educators, and lawyers have been trying to get answers to important questions about the role of the police in the community. There has been a lot of harm and mistrust resulting from the actions of them. There is even proof that because of that, Boston School Police play a role in reporting and information sharing, serving as an easy access link between the schools and law enforcement. Young people are being criminalized for normal, everyday teen behavior. We have seen the lack of transparency even in knowing how the police operate. I imagine the schools and my community to be a safe environment for everyone. No one should live in fear of the police. We need the surveillance oversight ordinance to be adopted now because it will help communities to feel safe in their own home and schools. Immigrant kids and kids of color are scared to go to school because they fear that a police officer will accuse them of something just because of how they look. People should not be a target to secret surveillance by the police. It is wrong and immoral. Minorities communities contribute a lot to the state and should never have to be scared of the ones who are supposed to protect them. We need to stop letting the police department abuse their power. They need to protect us and not target us. Kids are growing up and seeing police being the ones to be the bullies. Boston School Police and the Boston Police Department have been complicit in having youth incarcerated and deported for no reason other than being youth of color. Time and again, the harms of surveillance fall hardest on immigrants, activists, and people of color, the same communities whose health and safety Boston should be fighting for.
City councilors, my name is Leilani Oscar. I come to you today to question the integrity of the police department when it comes to police surveillance within the community. Due to the lack of rules and regulations, as well as the lack of transparency in publicizing the modes of surveillance, as well as the data, there has been a lot of mistrust regarding the actions of the police. This mistrust is in part, but not limited to, the role that the Boston School Police plays in continued reporting and information sharing, which serves as an easy access link between the schools and law enforcement. The disregard that the Boston School Police has to reporting rather than mediating student misconducts, as well as continuously overstepping by reporting to the Boston Police Department rather than the students and parents involved, shows a blatant disrespect towards these students and their families. The complicit and violent nature of targeting our communities of immigrants, activists, and people of color has caused for answers on the part of the Boston Police Department and the Boston School Police. The Surveillance Oversight and Information Sharing Ordinance serves as a means to not only hold both Boston School Police and Boston Police Department accountable for the surveillance of the communities they serve, but hold them accountable to communicate with the communities they target. It is imperative that the community have control in all policies and practices that relate or may impact them in any way, shape, or form. Thus, if this ordinance is adopted, it will provide greater transparency so that these and all communities will have a platform to assert their stance in the decision process for their surveilling. City councilors, I urge that you adopt this ordinance with haste and with the understanding that it will greatly benefit the communities you serve. With kind regards, Leilani.
City councilors, for years, young people, families, community organizations, educators, and lawyers have been trying to get answers to important questions about the role of police in the community. There has been a lot of harm and mistrust resulting from the actions of police. There's even proof that because of that, Boston School Police play a role in reporting and information sharing, serving as an easy access link between the schools and law enforcement. Young people are being criminalized for normal, everyday teen behavior. We have seen the lack of transparency even in knowing how the police operate. We need the surveillance oversight ordinance to be adopted now because it is not fair for others to be mistreated for something others are not affected by. I have witnessed Boston School Police and Boston Public Schools despite there not being a need for officers in schools. My vision for our communities is to be united and comfortable with one another. I imagine schools and my community to be a safe and comfortable space for everyone, regardless of their status and identities. School is a place to learn, not a place to fret and worry. It is a place to think of your future, not your lack of one. We need community control over the police because it is not not fair otherwise. It is an amendment and a right to treat people fairly. Yet this system is only an excuse to racially profile kids who are just trying to get an education. It is not freedom and is merely just holding many of us back. Boston School Police and the Boston Police Department have been complicit in having youth incarcerated and deported for no other reason than being youth of color. Time and time again, the harms of surveillance fall hardest on immigrants, activists, and people of color, the same communities whose health and safety Boston should be fighting to protect. This ordinance serves those communities and all communities by giving residents a voice in the decision-making process that decides how surveillance technologies will be used, when, and how. The communities that have to live subject to surveillance technologies should be the ones to decide whether they're necessary and what rules should be put in place for their use. The community should be in control, not a corporator, a corporation that profits off of surveillance, an executive agency working in secret, or anyone else. That is all. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kimberly, and I'm speaking in support of the Ordinance of Surveillance, Oversight, and Information Sharing presented by Council President Janey and Councilors Wu and Arroyo. This ordinance establishes oversight and accountability mechanisms over current surveillance practices and future acquisition of surveillance technologies in the city of Boston. The ordinance also sets rules that preserve students' privacy and prohibit unnecessary information sharing between the BPS, the Boston School Police, and Boston Police Department and federal agencies like ICE. Nationwide, people are marching in record numbers and demanding justice for Black communities long subject to police violence and an end to racism and white supremacy. This is a national conversation that involves not only current policing practices, but also the surveillance technologies that are used by police departments and agencies. I'm a senior at Boston Latin School and an intern with City Life Vida Urbana. As a young person engaged in my community, I live in close proximity to the hurt that my people live through every day, whether that be through housing or racial injustice. No one takes into account the negative effects these stressful situations could have on students of the BPS district. As a daughter of immigrants, I empathize and identified with the fears of my classmates and coworkers who are immigrants and sons and daughters of immigrants as well. Time and again, the harms of surveillance fall hardest on the immigrants and activists and people of color, the same communities whose health and safety Boston should be fighting to protect. This ordinance serves those communities and all the communities by giving residents a voice in the decision-making process that decides which surveillance technologies will be used, when, and how. With this law, Boston will set a new course using a tried and tested framework based on inclusivity and community consent. Thank you.
City councilors. For years, young people, families, and community organizations, educators, and lawyers have been trying to get answers to important questions about the role of the police in the community. There's been a lot of harm and mistrust resulting from the actions of the police. There's even proof that because the Boston School Police play a role in reporting and information sharing, serving as an easy access link between the schools and law enforcement, young people are normal everyday teen behavior. We have seen the lack of transparency even in knowing how the police operate. I have witnessed Boston School Police behaving in proper manners when handling situations in our schools. We as a community have lost our faith in our police. We are not in need of being controlled, but protected. Boston School Police and the Boston Police Department have been complicit in having youth incarcerated and deported for no reason other than being youth of color. Time and again, the harms of surveillance fall hardest on immigrant activists and people of color, the same communities whose health and safety Boston should be fighting to protect. This ordinance serves those communities and all communities by giving residents a voice in the decision-making process that decides which surveillance technologies will be used, when, and how. The communities that have to live subject to the surveillance technology should be the ones to decide whether they're necessary and what rules should be in place for their use. The community should be in control, not a computer, a corporation that profits from surveillance, an executive agency working in the secret, or anyone else. Thank you for your time.
Dear City Councilors, I am writing on behalf of the student immigrant movement in support of the ordinance on surveillance oversight and information sharing presented by Council President Janey and Councilors Wu and Arroyo. This ordinance establishes oversight and accountability mechanisms over current surveillance practices and future acquisition of surveillance technologies in the city of Boston. The ordinance also sets rules that preserve students' privacy and prohibit unnecessary information sharing between Boston Public Schools, Boston School Police, Boston Police Department, and the federal agencies like ICE. The City of Boston does not have any current mechanism by which residents can have a voice regarding the surveillance equipment that is used to control and police them. The ordinance before the City Council provides this crucial institutional reform. First, an ordinance providing accountability, transparency, and oversight regarding the use and acquisition of surveillance technologies and surveillance data collected by the City of Boston, its agencies, and its public officials is critically important in the City of Boston. Time and time again, our communities are living in fear because of the harms of surveillance instead of feeling protected within their own community. Second, this ordinance provides important protections to all students in Boston Public Schools and especially protects our immigrant students. Boston Public Schools must be a safe and welcoming place for all students no matter their immigration status. Students shouldn't fear going to school will result in their information being shared with ICE. In Boston, current policy and practice fail to create a safe learning environment for our students. Current data shows that over 130 reports from Boston Public Schools have landed in ICE's hands due to insufficient protection at the city level. We cannot wait until another student is deported to take decisive action to protect our youth. With this law, Boston will set a new course using a tried and tested framework based on inclusivity and community consent. Over a dozen cities nationwide, including 3 in Massachusetts, have already benefited from the transparency and accountability this type of ordinance brings. Thank you.
Dear City Councilors, my name is Catherine Asuncion. I live in Dorchester. I'm a formerly undocumented person, and I currently serve on the Student Immigrant Movement's board. I'm in full support of the Ordinance of Surveillance Oversight and Information Sharing presented by Councilor President Janey and Councilors Wu and Arroyo. I came of age being undocumented, filled with paranoia. The message I heard consistently in my house was to never mention about our undocumented status because we could get deported. I remember my dad warily checking out the window whenever he saw blue police lights. And I remember being in conversations with Sim and finding out that immigrant students in Boston were getting picked up by ICE inside their schools. This fueled my paranoia. And we weren't wrong for feeling this way. The recent Black Lives Matter protests have once again highlighted the racism in our police departments. This national conversation involves not only policing practices, but also the surveillance technologies that are being used. And time again, the harms of surveillance fall hardest on immigrants, activists, and people of color. This ordinance serves us, the residents, by giving us a voice in the decision-making process that decides which surveillance technologies will be used, when, and how. We need the surveillance oversight ordinance to be adopted now. Thank you so much.
Michelle, does that conclude the video?
Yes, that's all.
Very good. So I appreciate again everyone's time and attention, and obviously we've had a tremendous amount of testimony. And my sense is after I talk to the chair, we will look towards a working session with the lead sponsors, the chair and the lead sponsors. So with that, Docket 0684, the Committee on Government Operations is adjourned. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Candace, for your great work. Appreciate it. To my colleagues as well.
Thank
Have
you.
a good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.